Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku becomes Spider-Man, Deku x Momo, movie. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Zedra13, link is in the description, and also subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's begin the story. Deep in downtown Tokyo inside a dimly lit bar that was never open to anyone, two strange individuals stood. In front of them sat 20 or more test tubes filled with a strange black glowing substance that bubbled every so often. These two individuals were Tamura Shigaraki, a man who had hands covering his body and face, and Kurogiri, better known as Black Mist. Both men were villains that were a part of the League of Villains, and they were currently in the middle of creating their masterpiece that would finally stop the symbol of peace. Finally, we're drawing near to the end of All Might thanks to this beautiful thing right here, Shigaraki said in a creepy voice with a smile as he held up one of the test tubes. Pardon me for asking, but what do those do? You never actually stated what these are, only that they help this Namu. Kurogiri asked, trying not to annoy the other man, as it was never pretty when Shigaraki was angry. Shigaraki only snickered as he turned to Kurogiri. For once, I'm actually glad you asked. This here is our power-up for the final boss, that is All Might. It's the combination of a super strength quirk, a high stamina quirk, a super effective regenerative quirk, and a quirk that naturally hardens the bones. I call it the Namu Serum. Kurogiri looked at him, shocked. And you have more than 20 of these? We could make a small army out of these. Shigaraki snapped at the misty man when he heard that. You idiot. No, it's not his fault, he's stupid, he doesn't understand, Shigaraki spoke to himself as he scratched the sides of his neck with a slight twitch of his head. Kurogiri breathed a sigh of relief as the man-child calmed himself out of his hair-trigger rage. As if it would be that easy. Any human that consumes this formula dies after a matter of weeks due to the pure power of the combined quirks, not to mention the insanity. These formulas are all being used on an artificial body that was made for these quirks, a creature made of an organic substance we were lucky to find a couple of months back which we mixed with these formulas. Kurogiri understood what his boss said, but had to do a double take when he remembered something that was glossed over. Did you say insanity? The misty man asked with a slightly concerned and confused look, making Shigaraki sigh in annoyance. All the test subjects who consumed this formula experienced a variety of different side effects. First they would feel stronger and faster than ever before, then their bodies would start to improve with stronger bones, a slight healing factor, but finally their minds would start to crumble, voices whispering in the back of their mind. As time went on, the voices grew and merged until there was just one single voice trying to take over the body. The insanity and conflict within one body killed them, Shigaraki explained. Kurogiri just stared at the test tubes, horrified at the damage these simple vials of liquid could cause. Now recovering from the explanation, the mist-enveloped man nodded in understanding, but then asked one more question. What if this was used on an animal rather than a human? Shigaraki thought for a second about the question before looking down at the floor to see a spider crawl underneath them. Let's see, Shigaraki smirked as he picked up one of the vials and let 3 drops of the Namu Serum fall onto the spider. Almost instantly the spider freaked out, shaking violently and shooting small webs out before turning over with its legs curled up, effectively dying in agony. With a quiet laugh that oozed insanity from the pure sadistic tone of it, Shigaraki closed the vial and looked at Kurogiri with a spine-tingling smile. Same results. Now with both villains satisfied with their results, the two left the room to continue with their business. However, due to their exit, they failed to see the supposedly dead spider twitch one of its legs before flipping itself over and scuttling through a crack in the wall, leaving the building. A few days later. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to dream realistically, kid. Izuku Midoriya, a 14-year-old, third-year middle school student who was cursed at birth with no quirk in this world of weirdness, had just been told he can't be a hero by the very person he looked up to. All Might. Well, a deflated, almost skeleton-looking All Might. Izuku had just been emotionally destroyed. He thought that if he at least heard something inspirational from All Might, then he could finally push himself that little bit further to be a hero, but instead he got told the opposite, and all he could think about was every demoralizing thing he'd ever been told. You should just give up. What can you even do? You're totally useless. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry. Izuku felt so emotionally numb and zoned out. In his dazed state, he didn't notice the spider crawling up his trousers and onto his black school jacket. What did grab his attention, however, was the massive explosion that happened several streets away from him. Izuku's eyes lit up a little bit. I wonder what hero, Izuku said to himself with wonder in his voice before remembering. What was even the point? He was just an unimportant fanboy with no friends, no definable qualities, and no quirk. He shoved his self-deprecating thoughts aside and tried to bring up his mood by getting back in his fanboy mindset. He was about to run for the exit to go and investigate the explosion for himself, but was stopped by a massive piercing and burning pain hitting the back of his neck. Izuku winced in pain and said to himself with a sad smile, "Guess that's what I get for being optimistic." And with that, he continued towards the exit of the roof, walking slowly down the stairs with a depressed look on his face, while he thought to himself. Even the best of the best said it. Izuku raised his left hand and rubbed his nose and teary eyes. "Don't cry. You already knew, this is reality. It's because I knew that I tried so damn hard to ignore the reality of it all." Izuku continued to walk while fighting back tears, forcing himself to put one foot in front of the other. If he stopped moving now, he wouldn't be able to pick himself back up. Finally making it to the ground floor, Izuku exited the building. He looked around, gathering his bearings so he could make his way home when he was hit by a massive amount of dizziness, causing him to stumble and rest against a wall to stay standing. Where did that come from? Izuku questioned, as a sudden wave of nausea hit him so hard he almost threw up on the street. Izuku looked up at the sky while he waited for the nausea to subside to see a pillar of black smoke a couple of streets away. "Oh, that must be where that explosion came from," before Izuku mused distractedly. And just like that, the thought was gone, as quickly as it came, as he looked to the ground and walked mindlessly. Due to the sheer weight of the depressing emotion circling through Izuku's mind, he became numb to his surroundings and kept moving purely by autopilot. After a few minutes, Izuku heard a commotion nearby and turned to his left to see a group of people surrounding the entrance to a shopping district currently engulfed in flames. "I guess I just walked here subconsciously," Izuku thought, as a somber expression graced his features once more. Seeing as he was here, he decided he would make his way to the crowd to see what was happening. To Izuku's horror, he saw the dark green sludge villain that almost killed him earlier. Why is he here? I thought All Might captured him. The realization hit him as he thought back to earlier when he and All Might had a struggle mid-air. Izuku covered his mouth with his hands and went wide-eyed in shock. "This is my fault. Why aren't the heroes doing anything?" one of the watchers asked in a worried tone. Apparently the villain grabbed a middle schooler. Izuku felt even sicker at the sound of that. Someone else is enduring that same pain. He felt so guilty. It was because he wanted to ask questions. It was because. It's completely my fault. It's my fault. All Might can't do anything. Izuku merely prayed that the hostage would be able to hold out until a hero with the right quirk came along. But then he saw the eyes. The eyes that belonged to Kitsuki Bakugo to Kaken. The eyes that were filled with complete fear of death. In less than a second, Izuku went from the back of the crowd watching the scene playing out to dashing towards Bakugo as fast as his legs could carry him. Everyone was shocked at what Izuku was doing, including Izuku himself. "Get back here, you fool. Stop." The hero Death Arms yelled out to Izuku, which he ignored completely. Standing to the back of the crowd, All Might almost yelled out in surprise as he saw the quirkless fan he just admonished for his unrealistic heroic dreams not 10 minutes ago dash into the fray. What on earth is that kid doing? This is a job for the professionals, the heroes. He's going to get himself killed. Izuku was thinking much the same thing. What am I doing? Why am I? Izuku's thoughts faded quickly as another wave of nausea hit him, causing him to stumble in his sprint. The villain laughed and started to move his body, preparing to strike while Izuku began to stumble. As quick as the nausea hit, it faded as Izuku felt a massive sting in the back of his brain like a warning signal. The warning made Izuku use his stumbling position to his advantage and out of instinct push himself up into the air, dodging a fast swinging sludge arm. For a brief moment, Izuku didn't know who he was, like something had just sparked inside of him as he spun himself forward in the air. How did I do that? Izuku wondered in shock as he landed back on the ground, keeping his momentum to run. Remembering page 25 of his notes, he threw his school bag at the sludge villain with as much strength as his puny body could muster, temporarily blinding the monster. Now at the sludge monster, Izuku started clawing at the sludge surrounding Bakugo, even though he knew it was pointless to do so. Bakugo gave Izuku a confused look as he shouted with tears stinging his eyes. "My legs just started moving on their own. And you looked like you were asking for help." That one line hit All Might hard. He had been lecturing this kid about how he couldn't be a hero, and here this quirkless, powerless child was, risking his life while All Might just sat on the sidelines doing nothing, only thinking about himself. In his self-directed anger and disappointment, he slowly forced himself to transform. Pathetic, pathetic. Just as the sludge villain was about to take another swing at Izuku, All Might appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye and stopped the attack with his whole body. "I really am pathetic." He didn't sound big and proud like he always did, instead he sounded annoyed at himself. "Even when I admonished you, I wasn't putting what I said into practice." All Might shouted, gripping Izuku and Bakugo arms with his massive left hand. With blood shooting out of his mouth, All Might yelled, "A pro should always be ready to risk his life." He punched the air in front of the sludge villain with a mighty force as he shouted at the top of his lungs. Detroit, smash. The villain scattered into pieces from the sheer force of the punch, a punch which also created a powerful wind vortex that made all the clouds swirl around in the sky and released their watery holdings. He changed the weather with a single punch. One of the civilians in the crowd shouted in pure amazement. The rest of the crowd began cheering in joy that All Might defeated the villain with such ease. After the whole sludge villain fiasco, All Might dealt with the many questions from the press, while all the other heroes helped collect the scattered pieces of sludge for the police. Izuku had to deal with the shouting of heroes such as Death Arms and Kamui Woods, who kept telling him what he did was suicidal and idiotic. He also had a few paramedics ask if he was alright because of how unnaturally pale he was and the amount of times he almost threw up. On the other hand, Bakugo was getting praised by the heroes, saying he was so brave and his quirk was absolutely amazing. It's truly amazing how differently people are treated because of quirks. It's been about 10 minutes since the villain had been defeated and Izuku was on his way home to finally get some rest and hopefully sleep away the nausea. I wanted to apologize to All Might, but the reporters didn't make it easy. Plus, I'm not feeling so good right now, Izuku thought to himself as he put a hand to his head when he started to feel incredibly dizzy again. "Hey Deku." Izuku turned at the sound of his nickname from Bakugo and thought he'd say thanks or something along the lines of that. Instead, he was met with a very angry Bakugo that had charged at him and grabbed him by his jacket. "I never asked for your help. And, as if you could. You did nothing. You're a fucking quirkless failure. How dare you pity me, you fucking nerd." Bakugo yelled as he picked up the quirkless wimp and threw him backwards to fall on his butt. Izuku felt even worse now as he watched Bakugo storm off because he knew Bakugo was right, he couldn't do a single thing to help the situation. "I guess I should really focus on a realistic future. I am here." All Might suddenly rushed out onto the street and appeared dramatically in front of Izuku, as he always does, shocking Izuku and making him nearly jump out of his skin. "All Might, why are you here? I thought you were surrounded by reporters." All Might merely laughed loudly and stated, shaking them off as nothing to me. "After all, I am all mi cough." All Might was cut off by a stream of blood shooting out of his mouth and deflating down to his true form. Izuku screamed a little, but All Might regained his composure and calmly spoke to Izuku. "Kid, I've come to thank you, apologize, and I have a proposal." Izuku looked confused but said nothing as he was curious. "If I hadn't heard your story, I'd have been nothing but fake muscles and fake sincerity, and for that, I thank you." Izuku felt a little better hearing that, but still looked down in sadness. "No, it was my fault from the start. I got in the way, and even though I'm a quirkless failure." "You're wrong." All Might shouted, cutting Izuku off, making the teen startle a little. "Of all the people there, it was only you, a timid and quirkless kid, who acted. Most of the top heroes show signs of greatness even as children." Many of them claim that Izuku pieced together what All Might was saying and slowly broke down as tears stung the corners of his eyes. "Please don't say it, I don't deserve to hear it, please." Their bodies moved before they could think. "Please don't. That's what happened to you, yes. Yes." Izuku unconsciously answered All Might's question despite being a complete mess on the inside. All Might smiled and said, with no hesitation, the two lines that would change Izuku's life forever. "Kid, I believe you can become a hero. And that you are worthy to inherit my power." "Huh?" All Might burst out laughing when he saw Izuku's confused face. "What's that face for?" All Might then pointed at Izuku as blood shot out of his mouth. "I'm asking you if you want to try accepting my power." Izuku looked confused and thought this whole thing was a dream. "You really doubt me that much?" Izuku panicked and tried to deny it, saying that he actually believed him, but he was cut off by All Might. "I have many secrets, but I never lie." All Might then held out his left hand and let his palm glow slightly as he continued. "I have the ability to transfer my power. That's the quirk I inherited. It's called One for All." Izuku was shocked. He'd never heard of a quirk that could be transferred from one person to another, but more importantly, why was it being offered to him of all people? "But why me?" All Might smiled at Izuku and pointed at him as well. "I've been searching for a successor for a long while now, and back there, you were more heroic than anyone else. That is why I believe you are a worthy successor." All Might made a loud cough sound and spurted out more blood. "Of course, this depends on your answer." Izuku was beyond speechless. He'd just been told All Might's greatest secret and been offered his power because he was seen as worthy. His head was spinning from all this unbelievable information. "Do I have a reason not to accept this?" "No." Izuku rubbed his eyes with his school jacket sleeve and looked up at All Might with complete seriousness. "Yes." I accept. Izuku attempted to speak, but was cut off by himself suddenly passing out and falling face first into the ground. Hey kid, you alright? All Might shouted as he rushed to Izuku's side, shaking him a little with a worried and concerned expression. A few hours later. Izuku groggily awoke from his sudden slumber to see the pale ceiling of his bedroom. Oog, I feel like shit. Wait, was that all a dream? Figures, Izuku thought with a sad expression as he assumed everything he thought happened was fake. After lying there for a few seconds, Izuku felt a vile wave of nausea hit his body. In a panic, Izuku put his hand to his mouth and ran as fast as he could to the bathroom, even going so far as to ram the door open with his shoulder. No sooner was his head over the toilet bowl than he began ejecting his insides into the white bowl, his loud sickening groans echoing off the bathroom walls and inside his skull, just making him want to vomit more. After Izuku had finished vomiting, he washed his mouth out and turned around to see his mother, Midoriya, standing there. With a look that was a mix between relief and concern, she ran up and hugged her son. I'm so happy you're okay. When that blonde skeleton-looking man showed up with you passed out, I was so worried, and Izuku went wide-eyed as he realized she was talking about All Might, so him saying he could be a hero wasn't a dream at all. Izuku, did you hear me? Izuku snapped out of his little internal moment and looked at his mom and smiled. I'm sorry, I zoned out there. Inko held out a small piece of paper that was folded and had for only Izuku to read written on it. He wanted me to give you this. Izuku looked at the paper with a glowing smile and took the letter before dashing to his room. Do you need anything, sweetie? Food? Water? Izuku poked his head around the corner at the question and smiled back at his mother. I'm fine, Mom, I just need some sleep. Inko smiled worriedly back at her son. Okay, just let me know if you need anything. Now buzzing with joy, Izuku entered his room, closing the door behind him to ensure he wouldn't be disturbed. He hastily opened his letter, reading it mentally in All Might's voice. Hey kid, you really had me worried there when you passed out on me. I had to look through your bag to find your address so I could make sure you were safe at home. Make sure you get rest tonight as your training starts tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Takoba Municipal Beach and it won't be easy. Izuku set his alarm for 8 a.m. and took off his clothes so he was only in his underwear. As the events of the day caught up with him, Izuku was overcome with the urge to sleep, so walked towards his bed, but he stopped when he walked past his mirror. Izuku looked at himself in the mirror and saw his small skinny body that lacked any noticeable muscles. It didn't really help that he had a really high metabolism, so he was stuck as the small skinny kid until God knows when. But, as he stepped away from the mirror, Izuku hesitantly turned slightly so his back was visible to him. On his neck was what seemed to be a deep spider bite that had a string of web leading out of it. At the end of it was a dead, shriveled up spider which swung from side to side like a pendulum. Izuku looked at it in a scared horror before pulling the surprisingly strong web out of the bite in a hurry and putting it in the bin. Hopefully that thing wasn't poisonous, and why did it look like it had all the blood drained out of it? Was the last thing Izuku thought to himself as he examined the dead house spider before jumping into bed and drifting into a deep sleep. The next morning. As Izuku slowly stirred from his deep and restful sleep, he was surprised by his alarm clock. He jumped in shock as the clock seemed louder than usual and further away and below him. Wait, what? Izuku looked at what he thought was up and saw that he was mere centimeters away from his ceiling, being held up by his fingertips and toes. He had literally jumped up from his bed and onto the ceiling. What the hell? Izuku said to himself as he dropped onto his bed with a soft thud. Izuku jumped out of bed and rushed to his mirror, fearful for what had happened to him. In it, he saw that he wasn't the same wimpy-looking Deku from before and now he was muscular as hell. He must have actually thrown up his guts last night because it looked like he had little to no fat on his body and, instead, he was now a few inches taller in height and covered in sleek lean muscles that made it look like he'd been training his body for years. The thing that looked more out of place to Izuku than the muscles was the little almost tube-like things coming out of his wrists. As if he knew what to do, he pushed his middle finger and ring finger into his palm for less than a second and on Izuku's mirror, a small splatter of webbing appeared. What the hell was that spider? Just as Izuku said that, his mother entered, doing her usual routine of collecting his dirty clothes from the day before. Morning Izuku. Breakfast is on the tea. Inko dropped the clothes she was holding and stared at her son in complete shock. Izuku, what happened to you? Izuku waved his hands in front of his face out of embarrassment. I honestly don't know, Mom, I swear. I just woke up like this. I don't know what happened, honest. Both Izuku and Inko were incredibly confused as to what had actually happened to the curly-haired teen overnight. After a few moments of silence, Inko was the first one to break the tension within the room. Well, your breakfast is on the table, and I'll see if I can find some of your father's old clothes, as you seem to be about his height now. Izuku scratched the back of his head nervously and sat on his bed waiting for some clothes while he figured out what exactly had happened to him and what powers he'd apparently gained. With another press into his palm, Izuku held what he guessed was a form of web shooting pad organically built into his hand and watched as this time a line of webbing came out of his wrist. Stopping the web as it hit the wall, Izuku saw that it naturally disconnected from him, leading him to grab it with his hand. This seems to be almost identical to spider webbing, just a lot messier, Izuku stated out loud from his observation of the webbing and how it had impacted on his bedroom wall. He let the webbing fall to the floor as his mom handed him a black tracksuit with green markings on the sleeves and legs, as well as a white vest. "Thanks mom," Izuku smiled as he wasted no time in putting on the clothes before walking out into the kitchen and seeing a bowl of cereal freshly made for him. Thankfully Izuku didn't experience any more power problems during his breakfast. He did discover, though, that he couldn't fire out webbing with a clenched fist, it had to specifically be his middle and second to last fingers. However, it took a little more time to figure out how his new adhesive powers worked due to the fact he had a spoon stuck to his hand for almost 20 minutes. Later on that same morning, All Might sat on a fridge in his normal form, waiting for Izuku to turn up to his first day of intense training at Takoba Municipal Beach. All Might heard fast footsteps not too far away from where he was sitting, and when he saw a mop of black and green curly hair, he knew it was Izuku. "Midoriya, my boy. You finally showed up for your training." All Might had buffed up and jumped down to meet Izuku, but was met with a completely different looking Izuku wearing a not so baggy white vest, black and green sweatpants, and a jacket wrapped around his waist. "Midoriya, I swear you weren't this tall yesterday," All Might laughed as he patted Izuku's head, making Izuku look away out of embarrassment due to the comment from his now mentor. "I don't know what happened to me, but I've gotten stronger and faster somehow. I think I might have gotten a quirk." All Might smiled at Izuku and patted him on the back as he began to laugh at the teen's excited nature. "Well, that makes giving you my power much easier, as you'll probably be able to handle the power now." Izuku's face brightened at that realization. He was now in fact strong enough to handle the power he was offered by All Might, but for some reason it felt wrong. "No, I can't." All Might's laughter almost instantly stopped as he looked at Izuku, who seemed incredibly deep in thought. "Are you completely sure, young Midoriya?" Izuku nodded his head and looked at All Might with complete seriousness. It was almost the exact same look in his eye that he had when he was about to accept All Might's power. "Yes, I want to master this new quirk before I start using one for all." All Might laughed up at the sky with his hands on his hips and then pointed at Izuku's chest. "Then show me what you can do." Izuku smiled and looked at a broken truck 20 meters away from him. He fired 2 web lines out of his wrists that attached to the truck and held them tightly in his hands. "That's certainly new and now deflated," All Might stated as he watched with complete intrigue. Izuku ran a full sprint, which was incredibly fast. It was probably as fast as All Might at about 4%. He then jumped several meters in the air and did a forward flip, so he was holding his webbing above his head. As he went over the truck, he pulled as hard as he could on his webs, lifting the truck into the air. When Izuku landed, he pulled his webbing to the ground and had the truck fly over him and slam into the ground with a colossal amount of force. With a sense of pride and accomplishment, Izuku turned around to look at All Might with a tired but smiling face. "Kid, you exceeded my expectations 10 times over." And with that one extreme showcase of power, the training of Izuku Midoriya's spider powers began. Roughly a month had passed since Izuku had started training with the number 1 hero to try and get a better grasp of his arachnid-like abilities. His training with All Might on the beach changed a little as, due to the teen's newfound strength and speed, he was clearing up the beach with ease at an exponential rate which shocked even himself. However, there was one aspect where Izuku had no experience whatsoever, which is why All Might's lesson today was combat training. Izuku questioned in his training tracksuit while All Might towered over him in his buff form. "Yes, young Midoriya. While it is good you now possess such strength and speed, it is also important to know how to use such power," All Might exclaimed as he began to walk away from Izuku whilst doing so. "Okay, I can understand that, so where do we start?" Izuku curiously asked as he watched All Might stand a few feet in front of him with his hands placed firmly on his hips. "Attack me." All Might laughed loudly while Izuku looked like he was now shaking. "What? I don't stand a chance against you." Izuku stuttered in fear with his legs shaking in the sand. "Just have a go, young Midoriya." With that little bit of confidence from All Might, Izuku closed his eyes and calmed his breathing before he began to think. "Okay, just think of it as an imposter or a villain." "Oh god, he looks so intimidating," Izuku thought with a fearful look on his face as he tried to analyze a way to do this and failed miserably. Finally realizing he had no other way of approaching this, Izuku broke out into a sprint at All Might with a determined look. All Might didn't move an inch as he saw Izuku ready himself to fight. With a swift leap into the air, Izuku reeled his right arm back ready to punch at the still unmoving All Might. Before Izuku could even throw his punch, he felt a sting in the back of his head. Unable to react to the warning, Izuku was sent flying backwards until he was sliding across the sand clutching his stomach in pain. You hesitated. If you are going to learn to fight, then you need to let your instincts kick in. All Might boomed out as Izuku picked himself up off the ground, clenching his hand in the sand. Now filled with even more determination not to let All Might down, Izuku charged forward at an even faster speed than before. All Might observed his protege as he saw his right arm move for attack, making the bulky hero ready his right arm to hit him again. To his surprise though, Izuku used his arm movements as a distraction, so his jump and immediate mid-air spin kick could deliver as much of an impact as possible. Izuku's face paled a little when he saw All Might had easily blocked his powerful kick with a big smile on his face no less. The impact was quick and hard enough to kick up a large amount of sand, but to All Might, it was merely a tap on his left arm. Surely you can hit harder than that. All Might's comment made Izuku all the more fearful as he pushed off and quickly ran back to a safe distance. I can't do anything. He's just too powerful, Izuku fearfully thought as he watched All Might's smile fade, but his pressure increased even more. The fear from Izuku was completely paralyzing as he stood there shaking with pure terror. A split second was all the hero needed, as in that instant he appeared in front of Izuku and stopped a tremendously powerful punch just before Izuku's face. The shockwave alone blew back meters upon meters of sand. It even blew all of Izuku's hair back, so it was standing up on edge while he laid down on the sand in shock. That was today's real lesson, kid. Accepting that there is and will always be someone stronger or more skilled than you, and now deflated, All Might said with a small smirk on his face as he first opened, willing to help up Izuku. I still have so much to learn. Izuku replied in a tone of realization, while All Might couldn't help but burst out in laughter at his out-of-the-blue response. Yes, you do, kid. Yes, you do. As a small house spider spun its web in the corner of Izuku Midoriya's room, he watched it with fascination and pure concentration, and notebook and pencil in hand to write down every little detail he deemed necessary about the spider's movements. He occasionally alternated pages to write information about his newfound powers in this notebook that was unlike all his previous ones. It was dedicated solely to himself, mainly his powers, moves, and costume. Powers-wise, I only have a few powers that resemble the abilities of a spider, but, as it currently stands. Spider grip, incredibly grippy hairs on my hands and feet allowing me to crawl on nearly all surfaces. Other uses of this have yet to be tested. Side note. My feet can't stick to surfaces when wearing thick-soled shoes. Custom shoes boots are in the design process. Spider sense gives me a nerve jolt that warns me of any attacks aimed at me. Other uses yet to be discovered. Side note. Ability does not indicate what is putting me at risk, so I have to use my own observation to figure it out. Web shoot, organic yet incredibly strong webbing that shoots from 3mm wide bone tubes which protrude from both wrists, triggered by what seem to be palm pressure points. The longer these are pressed, the longer the web. Combat-worthy moves regarding the webbing are in progress. Side note. Webbing is still very spread out and splatter-like. Web filters and enhancements are also still in design stages. Web zip, previously mentioned webbing shot at an object or surface, then pulled so a large amount of distance is covered in a matter of seconds. Current movements of web zip have a lot of drag and feel sluggish. Izuku tapped the bottom of his pencil against his chin as he thought to himself about the other powers of his new quirk that weren't really spider-related but still obviously useful, and continued to mutter to himself as he wrote them down. Other powers include enhanced strength, making physical strength far greater than before, allowing me to carry 2.5 tons above my head for approximately 10 minutes, 5 tons for 5 minutes if I push myself. Strength seems to increase as powers develop within my body, so accurate limits are still unknown. Enhanced reflexes, making reaction speed 5 times faster than before, not an accurate estimate. These are not completely confirmed and could increase with development. Enhanced speed, making my body able to react to my new reflexes, also making sprints and quick succession punches able to be pulled off with ease. Enhanced flexibility, making my body a lot more flexible than before, allowing me to pull off advanced gymnastic moves with ease. Maneuverability is improved as a result, making movement easier and smoother. Enhanced stamina. Stamina has been increased to support enhanced physical abilities, allowing me to run and exert myself for extended periods of time with reduced levels of exhaustion. Absolute limits are still unknown, but the current limit is being in a continuous sprint for 15 minutes and 47 seconds. Enhanced balance, making me able to balance on skinny surfaces and in different positions, such as in a handstand and on one leg. Heightened senses, physical senses have been enhanced to be more sensitive to stimuli. Hearing is far better, making sounds louder, and allowing sound to be heard from further away. Sight enhanced, allowing things to be seen from further away and in the dark. Touch enhanced, allowing for small vibrations and airflow to be felt. Taste and smell potentially unchanged. Izuku set his notebook and pencil to the side and stretched his hand out to ease the cramp that had developed after hours of contemplation and writing. He continued to do so as he lay back on his bed still looking at the spider's movements. Izuku had begun observing spiders alongside his training for about 2 weeks now, studying one spider's movements and repeating this process whenever a new one entered his room. The one he was currently observing was the most web-based spider so far. He thought it was a good way to expand his knowledge of his powers, as he didn't really think past basic things. As the spider crawled across its web, it held onto a stray strand of web attached to the ceiling. Izuku sat up in intrigue as he watched the spider swing across from one wall to another with complete ease. He quickly grabbed his notebook and wrote down one last note with a question mark next to it before setting it back down and going to sleep. Web swinging. The next morning Izuku awoke from his sleep with a peaceful smile as he remembered that today was thankfully his day off to rest. Clambering out of his bed, Izuku changed into a casual outfit that consisted of a plain black hoodie and dark gray baggy cargo pants with his iconic red sneakers so that he was at least comfy while he did his training. "Mom, I'm heading into the city center today for some training. I should be back by 5. Izuku shouted out from his room, packing his notebook and some other bits and pieces into his backpack before heading into the kitchen where a little bento box was set on the kitchen side table. "I had a feeling you'd be out for training when I heard all that mumbling coming from your room last night." Izuku laughed nervously as he put the bento box in his bag and walked to the door, waving back at his mum. "Don't do anything stupid." Izuku froze on the spot but continued to walk out after a second as he thought to himself, "I can't promise that." Now with a general destination in mind, Izuku splattered a bit of webbing onto his shoes and threw himself onto the building opposite, climbing to reach the roof. Once there, he quickly rid his shoes of the webs so as not to slow or hinder his coming actions. Right, time for a warm-up, Izuku thought as he began stretching to loosen up his muscles before he burst into a run. Thankfully, because more than half of the buildings were the same height, Izuku found jumping between them child's play. Whenever he had to jump across a street or there was a larger than normal gap, Izuku used his new web zip technique to help cover more distance. After some time of rooftop running and web zipping, Izuku found himself out of breath entering the high-class area of Tokyo. The teen wandered around the city center where he was surrounded by what seemed to be a forest of skyscrapers and high-rises, some of which were under construction, the perfect area for him to test his new web swinging. Gauging the different buildings, Izuku looked towards a particular high-class apartment building that was relatively tall, but definitely smaller than the other buildings around it, and it conveniently had a crane nearby. That should do for these tests, Izuku thought as he neared the apartment complex. He stopped when he saw the huge doorman blocking the front entrance with his arms crossed. "I guess I'm taking the back route then." Izuku made his way around to the back of the apartment building so that he was now in an alley and no one could see him. With a quick glance in both directions, the curly-haired teen lifted his left foot up and shot some webbing onto the sole and tip of his shoe, then repeated this process for his right foot. In one swift motion, Izuku went from on the ground to 5 meters up the wall, being held up by his fingertips and the tips of his shoes. "Okay, just like practice. Left, right, Izuku followed his words, trying to synchronize his arms and legs with them until he got a steady rhythm going where he could climb without complete concentration on his climbing. Izuku felt his nose twitch from the cold breeze as he got to the very top of the apartment building wall. He threw himself upwards and forwards so that he could pull off a little forward flip before landing on both feet with ease. "That's still so cool to do," Izuku said to himself as he grinned like an idiot before walking to the left side of the roof where a crane arm was visibly in range for Izuku to shoot webbing at. Izuku crouched down next to the edge and swung his bag off his back, taking out his notebook and writing the following as he spoke it aloud. "Attempt 1. One simple swing out and back in to see if the webbing can support my body weight for a slightly extended period of time." Izuku rested his notebook and bag on the small wall that was on the very edge of the roof before taking out a pair of sunglasses from his pocket. He put them on and pulled up his hood, effectively hiding most of his face and hair. "I don't want to worry Mum by showing my face while swinging around the city with the possibility of death." He stepped towards the edge and pulled back his sleeves a little so that he wouldn't have any interference from his clothing when firing a web line. Izuku aimed with his right arm at the crane's arm and pushed into his palm with his middle and ring finger, holding them there until a clear line of webbing shot out from his wrist towards the crane. It took a few attempts, but when he hit the crane, Izuku quickly stopped pressing his palm, which stopped and disconnected the webbing from his wrist and held onto the web with both hands. After a single second of standing on the edge, Izuku's body began to tremble violently out of pure fear and adrenaline rushed through him. This is a lot higher than I'd thought it would be. Making the mistake of looking down, he was hit by a wave of fear making him tremble and shake. Izuku took several deep breaths and closed his eyes. Okay, 1 2 3. On 3 Izuku jumped off the edge and started screaming at the top of his lungs in fear as he held his arms out in front and started to swing forwards. The second Izuku felt himself slowing down. As he swung, he opened his eyes and tried his best to turn around. He mostly succeeded as he was now facing the apartment building, but he didn't have the momentum to make it back to the roof. Izuku went into a panic, fearing that he was going to be stuck on the crane and get into trouble, but with some split-second thinking that he knew would be stupid, he let go of the web line at just the right moment, so he went upwards into the air. With his left arm aimed at the roof, he shot a web line straight onto it and the web zipped back onto the roof. He landed with a roll and lay down on his back immediately after, clutching his chest and feeling his heartbeat at an insane pace. Pant attempt pant 1. Success. Izuku caught his breath, then grinned like an idiot up in the sky before punching his fist up in the air. This is the kind of rush I need to push myself forward in my training. Hours quickly passed as Izuku practiced his web swinging technique to the point where the extreme heights didn't even bother him that much. Alright, attempt 38. Swing from building to building and test different movements in mid-air to see if they make any changes to speed. Izuku finished writing down what he had just said out loud and set his notebook back down before he took several large steps back ready for a run-up. Thanks to a long calming breath, Izuku focused solely on his web swinging and the path he was mentally planning out in detail. With a small burst of speed, he ran towards the edge of the roof and leapt off, throwing his arms forward so he got more distance out of the jump. Arms positioned and ready, he fired a web line straight at the crane with his right arm and held onto it with both hands above his head. Izuku let his body relax as he swung with incredible speed so that he maintained his momentum, adjusting his body as he swung and letting go at just the right moment to send him flying upwards, feet first. As he traveled upwards through the air, Izuku did a small backflip, so he was diving down head first. It didn't last long as he fired another web line from his left wrist onto the roof of a building high above him to his left. Izuku only let himself swing left a little bit before pulling on the web so that his entire body was above the web, gaining higher ground. He then immediately shot to his right so that he wasn't traveling one-sided to the left. Izuku repeated this process in no particular order and occasionally shouted woohoo with every big swing he did. After about 10 minutes of non-stop swinging, Izuku made his way back to the apartment complex and landed on the roof in a crouching position. He looked at the edge of the roof where his notebook and bag should have been, but his notebook was nowhere to be seen. Wow, the research you've done on your own quirk is outstanding. I mean, this level of detail is just wow. Izuku whipped around in an instant and aimed his right wrist in the direction he heard the voice from, but was surprised to see a somewhat tall girl with black hair and a spiky ponytail and side fringe standing there, reading his notes in a thick jumper and shorts. The girl threw her hands in the air, still holding Izuku's notebook. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have startled you like that. I just got so caught up reading your notes," she said apologetically. Izuku got out of his crouched stance and lowered his arm as he quickly became an embarrassed mess due to the fact that he was talking to a girl he's never met before. "No, it's my fault for being so jumpy. What are you doing up here anyway?" The black-haired girl laughed a little. "Well, when you see someone swinging around your apartment building for more than 2 hours, you tend to get a little curious." Izuku looked away a little as he realized that was a stupid question he just asked. He even went so far as to try and hide his face, even though he was still wearing his hood and sunglasses, effectively hiding his identity from the girl. "Who are you anyway? With a quirk like yours, you would be pretty popular even if you're young." Izuku just removed his hood and moved his sunglasses onto his forehead as he stuttered out his name. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. Can I please have my notes back?" Izuku's face immediately went into shock as he mentally regretted what he just said. "I was meant to say nice to meet you, not that. Why am I such a mess?" A loud laugh came from the black-haired girl as she walked over to Izuku with a warm smile. "You know, when I first saw you land and act so hostile, I thought you were gonna be all serious and edgy, but instead you're funny and very smart judging from your notes. And you're actually kinda cute." She obviously thought that last part, a small blush spreading across her face. "I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, by the way, but you can call me Momo-chan if it's easier." Momo handed Izuku his notebook back and he did his best to smile back as he took it, trying not to break down from the whole situation. "Thanks, Momo-chan." Izuku stepped back and was about to put his notebook back in his bag before Momo spoke up to stop him. "Can I make a suggestion about your costume design?" Momo asked as Izuku attempted to head to the edge of the roof, aiming to escape the awkward situation. "Sure." Momo's eyes almost instantly lit up when he agreed. With the light still in her eyes, she pulled a pencil out of nowhere and began to draw. Izuku watched as within seconds, Momo had drawn a rough outline of him with his arms out to the sides. She had clearly added a sort of wing to a point just above his elbow and just above the halfway point of his ribsage. It didn't look like a bird's wings, but more like the gliding wings of a flying squirrel. "You should add something underneath your arms, about here, so you can glide for a short period of time before you start swinging again." Izuku thought about it for a second before he pointed at the gliding wings. "Wouldn't it be more of a burden when swinging though, as it would cause more wind resistance?" Momo started to get a little excited that she could finally talk to someone about a smart topic for once, or just someone in general. "Not if you use a stretchy material, that way you can prevent large amounts of drag, but I guess you'd suffer with a small amount of drag." Now realizing the error within her costume addition, Momo quietened down, but was surprised to see Izuku flip over the page to a completely blank page. "Can you actually help me out? I need to improve my web swinging positioning, and I can't draw at all," Izuku nervously asked while scratching the back of his head. "Of course. I'd be happy to." Now smiling brightly, Momo gently took the notebook before she sat and leaned against the roof entrance, watching as Izuku walked towards the edge of the building. "It would work better if I could get a side view of you swinging," Momo suggested to Izuku as he looked back before looking up at the crane. Without a word, Izuku shot a web line at the end of the crane before he began pulling on the web with both hands. Completely gobsmacked by what he was doing in front of her, Momo proceeded to watch as Izuku began to pull the large crane out of position. In less than a minute, Izuku had turned the giant crane towards them so that Momo could get a better look of his movements. "That'll do," Momo nervously said with a shaky thumbs up to Izuku as he web zipped up onto the crane. With a quick rise of his hood and the descent of his sunglasses, Izuku gave Momo a few seconds before he leaped off one of the sides. With a quick mid-air turn, Izuku shot a line onto the crane and let his legs bend back as he held onto the webbing. Momo watched Izuku do the same swing a few more times before she sketched an outline of him doing the swing, trying to keep it as anatomically accurate as possible. They then continued this for the handful of web swinging positions Izuku had, but when he had finished, Momo managed to persuade him to show her his web zipping techniques so she could draw them too. Izuku patiently waited on top of the crane arm for a few minutes, catching his breath from doing a total of almost 3 hours of pure web movements, before leaping down next to her in a crouched position and getting a glimpse of the drawings of him. "Wow, you're amazing at drawing," Izuku said, making Momo blush a little, as she wasn't really used to the compliment. "Thanks anyway, here are the main positions you make when you use your webs," Momo stated, as she fully showed Izuku every position of him she had drawn. "Do I really stick out my leg that much?" Izuku questioned as he looked at one of his web zip positions, the one where he pulls the line of webbing underneath his body, almost like he's leaping over it. "Well, what if instead you did a more corkscrew-based movement?" That suggestion made Izuku think for a minute before he got up to test the new movement. Now with a general idea of how to move, Izuku leapt off the building and aimed at the building opposite with both hands, firing off 2 web lines. Now pulling both webs to the sides of his body, Izuku twisted his body towards the right before letting himself naturally spin through the air, covering much more distance than normal. When he landed on the opposite building, Izuku leapt back over to Momo's building to see her with a proud look on her face. "Told you it would help." With his blush and stutter returning, Izuku replied while glancing away from Momo. "I never said it wouldn't. He's so cute when he's nervous, yet he gets so serious when we talk about technical stuff like his suit," Momo thought to herself with a small giggle as she watched Izuku act extremely nervous. It was clear he had no idea what to do with himself. To make it easier for him, Momo stood up with his notebook in hand and walked over to him with a soft smile before she spoke in her elegant voice. "It's getting late and I need to get some studying done. Here are all your notes, and if you want, you can come back here tomorrow and we can work on your notes a little more." Izuku just frantically nodded in response as he shakily took his notebook back and put it into his bag. "Okay," Izuku nervously stuttered out before he swung his bag onto his back and edged away towards the side of the roof to leave. "Oh, before you go. We should probably exchange numbers, you know, to let each other know if we can't meet up," Momo called, as Izuku had become a darker shade of red from hearing that. Izuku shakily walked back before Momo added her number to his phone and also took the liberty of adding Izuku's to her phone. Giving a nervous wave, he leapt straight into a web swing, leaving Momo to watch him with a small smile on her face. "He really is an interesting person. Oh my god. Oh my god." I can't believe I actually talked to a girl. And I didn't act like an idiot, much Izuku excitedly thought to himself as he perched on the edge of a high building, trying to recover from what just happened. She was so nice, and she actually wanted to talk to me. He was now smiling to himself, as Izuku never really had girls want to talk to him, they just made fun of him, called him wimpy, and regularly insulted him just for being quirkless. Now with positive thoughts in mind, Izuku looked down the edge he was perched on and jumped down, ready to climb with his spider grip. However, as he jumped his spider sense flared out of control, distracting him for a single moment as his hands gripped onto the wall, but his feet continued to slide down the wall. In that brief moment Izuku remembered that in all his time with Momo, he forgot to reapply the webbing to the soles of his feet. With the tips of his fingers in agony from all his body weight on them, Izuku let go and leaned back a little, aiming his arms straight up at the wall. Quickly using both arms to get a web line ready, Izuku fired 2 webs before pulling himself up back onto the roof. I really need some new shoes, Izuku thought to himself as he began to jump from rooftop to rooftop, excited for his visit to Momo's the next day. Now in terms of school, Izuku was lucky to not be that noticeable or liked, but the fact that he had grown a few inches would likely raise some suspicions. That just meant Izuku had to go to extreme lengths to be unnoticed by everyone. However, Katsuki Bakugo existed. Boy, Deku. Where do you think you're going? The demanding shout of the blonde teen froze Izuku in place, just as he attempted to slip out of the classroom in the midst of everyone else. Oh, I mean we did just finish last period. Izuku nervously stuttered out as Bakugo drew closer. Shut up. You're never this fucking quiet, you're always talking to yourself in class like a sad little nerd. Yet for the last 4 weeks you've said fuck all. Bakugo snapped, making Izuku flinch in fear at the response. Izuku didn't think things through and just ended up stumbling over his words, making Bakugo's rage build. Reaching boiling point, he exploded and yelled, "Say something, you quirkless bastard." With his right arm flying up in Izuku's blind spot, Bakugo was ready to punch Izuku with full force. But in that split second before he first made contact, Bakugo felt an incredible grip on his wrist that was as tight as a vice. A vengeful growl could be heard emanating from Bakugo, but he was quickly silenced by the cold stare coming from the dark piercing eyes, peering between curly green strands of hair. Bakugo watched in shock as he was thrown back a couple inches by Izuku, who was standing there smirking. Seconds of complete stunned silence overwhelmed the classroom until Izuku's body jolted, and, as that moment passed, Izuku's bright green eyes grew wide with fear. "I'm gonna fucking kill you." Izuku didn't wait to hear anything else and sprinted out of the room, leaving behind a fuming Bakugo ready to blast him into hell. Bakugo barged through his frozen body to follow after Izuku, but after entering the hallway, there was no sign of the curly-haired teen at all. "You fucking coward." The rage that seeped from the explosive teen's voice was the most cold and vicious it had ever been, as his fists violently shook from how tight they were clenched. Now consumed in a silent rage, Bakugo dashed down the hall he knew Izuku would have had to run down to exit the building. However, said curly-haired teen was positioned on the ceiling out of sight, waiting for Bakugo's to follow him so that he could get to the roof. Thankfully for Izuku, he was able to do just that, letting him escape to the roof without any difficulties. Now leaping off the school roof, Izuku began to web zip and jump across the rooftops so that he could get home and change for his combat training with All Might. "Come on, young Midoriya. You have such a predictable pattern." All Might boomed out with a slight chuckle while in front of him was a heavily sweating, shirtless Izuku catching his breath, trying not to collapse. This session was no different from the one previous. Izuku tried to fight, but his hesitation and fear led to numerous punches hitting him like a truck. And while the hulking hero was proud to see Izuku stronger and faster than ever before, it meant nothing if he didn't know how to use that kind of power. "I'm trying to see how," Izuku panted out whilst looking up at his mentor. "Kid, your problem is that you're relying too much on these," All Might stated as he deflated, pointing at his eyes. "My eyes?" "Yes, you rely on what you can see to fight. Your sight is what's holding you back. Use your other senses," All Might instructed as he gave his protege a smile. "You'll get there, kid. I know you will." That comment was the spark of inspiration that Izuku needed to work even harder. That should cover the lesson for today. "I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for strength training, kid," All Might chuckled as he walked away from the team and off the beach completely. Izuku's inner moment of inspiration and drive was interrupted when he heard his phone notify him that he had a text message. Removing the device from his pocket, Izuku saw that Momo had messaged him asking if he was still interested in coming over to work on his notes a bit more. Being the nervous fool he was, he quickly put that of course he would still love to do it, failing to realize he was currently on a beach miles away drenched in sweat. Realizing his mistake, Izuku almost immediately dove into the clear blue waters of the sea to wash away the sweat. Rushing out of the water, the panicking teen pulled the now wet t-shirt over his head and onto his body before going into a web swing. By the time I get there I should be dry from all the swinging, Izuku reassured himself as he focused on getting to Momo's as fast as he could with both his web swinging and zipping. Because of his new movements for web zipping, the journey felt a lot faster than normal. It even helped with drying a lot better than normal as well. And within 20 minutes or so Izuku landed on the rooftop where Momo was happily waiting for him with a warm smile on her face. "Midoriya-kun. I'm so happy you could make it," Momo said while Izuku immediately turned into a stuttering red-faced mess. "So, do you want to focus on your movements or something else?" Momo asked with a curious expression as Izuku slowly started to compose himself. "Actually, I was wondering if we could work on my fighting ability," Izuku questioned as he scratched the back of his head, making Momo giggle at his nervous expression. "Of course, I'm guessing that you want me as a sparring partner," she said as a metal pole started to form out of her left arm. Momo pulled it out and began spinning it around herself before taking a fighting stance. Izuku nodded as a response before raising his own fists to fight, making sure not to underestimate Momo during their sparring match. After a couple seconds of thinking up a quick battle strategy, Momo charged at Izuku with a dash before leading with an overhead swing of her staff. Quickly crossing his arms into an X shape, Izuku relaxed his legs, so the impact did little to no damage. Izuku pushed the staff back up, but Momo responded instantly by trying to flip her weapon to go for a low strike. Thankfully his spider sense gave him enough warning to use his left hand to block it. Momo began to attack Izuku with a multitude of attacks that utilized quick jabs and heavy swings. Izuku was forced onto the defense as he kept looking for an opening. After a full 2 minutes of Izuku defending and blocking attacks, Momo backed away with a conflicted expression, as while Izuku did supply a strong defense, his offense was practically non-existent. She was going to mention this problem, but Momo could clearly see that he was well aware of his weakness. And then, all of a sudden, Izuku took off his shirt and wrapped it around his head like a blindfold. He made sure to keep his ears exposed so that his sense of hearing was clear. Momo was now very red-faced in pure embarrassment as she was not used to seeing half-naked male bodies, especially ones as well-defined as Izuku's. "Do you mind me asking as to why you blindfolded yourself?" Momo asked as she was trying her best to retain composure while Izuku took his fighting stance once more. "Oh sorry, I was told I relied too much on my eyes during a fight, so this is a test to see how I do with my other senses alone and if I can improve them anymore," Izuku simply explained to the dark-haired girl in complete seriousness. There was a moment of hesitation and uncertainty from Momo, but the certainty in his words and seriousness in training made her hesitation fade away. Taking a slightly different stance than previously, Momo charged forward with a side swing rather than an overhead to throw off Izuku. Izuku on the other hand was beginning to realize how much he needed to use his other senses. From his sense of sound alone, the teen could hear the staff swinging from his left, so with a quick step backwards, he just avoided the swing. Tapping into his sense of smell, Izuku could gather a good position of where Momo was judging from her naturally sweet scent, and because of the contrast between her scent and that of the metal staff, he could tell where they both were with decent accuracy when mixed with his use of sound. With Momo's next attack coming as a direct jab forward, Izuku started to shift his body to avoid it, but as he did so, his spider sense kicked in. In that moment Izuku's senses were dialed up to 11 and his mental image of Momo became so much more accurate where she was and everything else that was in close proximity appeared like a scan of the area in his mind. The enhanced feeling faded away after he avoided the attack, leaving him feeling somewhat depraved now with his less accurate vision. Izuku proceeded to dodge Momo's next 3 forward jabs and 4 swings in quick succession, trying to focus on the feeling of his spider sense enhancing his other senses so that he can always utilize his senses like All Might was trying to teach him. After her final jab at Izuku, Momo went for an overhead strike with as much force as she could muster. She almost hesitated due to the fact Izuku wasn't moving or reacting at all, but knew that wouldn't be beneficial for his training. As her staff quickly descended down to hit Izuku, Momo watched in shock as both of Izuku's hands caught the staff just before impact. In her moment of shock, Momo failed to counter Izuku's push of her staff so that he could lead with a straight right jab. Momo could just barely react in time to grab the other end of the staff and pull it into a diagonal defensive position to block Izuku's punch. She then immediately responded to his follow-up left with enough accuracy to push it off course from its target. Still not used to one-on-one combat, Izuku was pushed a bit off balance by Momo's counter, but quickly used the momentum of his punch to spin his body around. With the momentum still being carried, Izuku jumped up a little to follow up with a powerful spin kick. The kick made a powerful impact with Momo's staff, and it snapped in half from the sudden force, Izuku instantly backing away a few feet. Momo herself was both shocked and impressed at the potential power residing within Izuku. Now with two short staffs in hand, Momo changed her stance to a more speed-based one and couldn't help but smile as she rushed him. With a better understanding of how to fight, Izuku dashed to meet Momo with his own smile as they were both really getting into the sparring match. Jabs, hooks and kicks were flying like a flurry of wild birds from Izuku, while Momo's strikes, swings and occasional kicks were fast and precise like a snake lunging at its prey. Most of their attacks were either countered or dodged by the other, but they didn't care, they were having the time of their lives. Countless attacks were thrown at each other before they both backed away trying to catch their breath. Izuku undid his blindfold, still grinning with a tired expression on his face, while Momo began giggling to herself before it evolved into complete laughter. Giggling a little himself, Izuku attempted to ask her why she was laughing, but he couldn't even get the words out as he ended up joining her in a fit of laughter. A few minutes passed as the two teens enjoyed their fits of laughter before they finally sat up and looked at each other, Momo being the first to break the silence between them. "I've never laughed so hard before," Momo confessed as she rubbed her watery eyes while Izuku did the same. "Me neither, I didn't expect that to be so much fun," Izuku stated, his nervous stutter calming a little as he was actually starting to feel a little relaxed around Momo. "You're a really talented fighter, Midoriya-kun. The fact that you realized you were overthinking your movements and were able to fight more efficiently shows you know what you're doing," Momo complimented with a smile, that comment alone turning Izuku back into a bright red mess. Once again, Momo couldn't help but giggle at Izuku's nervous nature as it was just so cute coming from him. As she was looking at him, she also spotted that the sun was beginning to set, meaning that it wasn't long until he had to leave. Izuku noticed it too, but thought of something quick as an excuse to visit her on his rest day tomorrow. "Hey Momo-chan, would you mind if you could teach me to draw like you?" Izuku nervously asked as an embarrassed mess. "Of course. I'd be more than happy to oblige, and maybe we could make it a regular activity along with our sparring." Momo began with a bright look of excitement in her eyes before she quickly returned to her more mature and composed expression. "Yeah, I like the sound of that." Izuku smiled at her as he slipped on his shirt while heading towards the edge of the roof. Momo couldn't help but wanted to watch him swing away, so she walked towards the edge as well. He gave his final goodbye, a shy smile on his face, and the swan dived off the roof. Not being able to help but watching with a smile, Momo observed Izuku as he swung through the city with complete ease, his body twisting and bending as if it was a completely normal thing to do. Even from the faraway distance he now was, Momo could tell the look on Izuku's face was one of pure adrenaline and confidence. The fact he could swing so high up in the city with complete confidence yet was a stuttering mess when it came to talking to her was such a peculiar thing about him. Momo wanted to learn more about him. What exactly made him tick? What life did he live to be who he was? Just how talented was he? One thing that Momo knew for sure though, was that he is by far the most intriguing person I've ever met. Nothing really changed in the next 2 weeks. All Might trained Izuku to improve his body's overall performance in both speed and power. All Might wanted to give his pupil the time to figure out how to fight properly without relying solely on his sight. Unknown to him, Izuku was training every other day with Momo both in combat and occasionally in intellectual conversation. Both teens' movements were getting sharper and quicker with every sparring session, leading to the both of them coming out of it as better fighters. Oblivious to his extra efforts, All Might stood on Takoba Municipal Beach waiting for Izuku to arrive. Within minutes, Izuku arrived at the slightly clearer beach in his training clothes, shakily walking towards his mentor with a hint of hesitation in his step. "Come on kid, I want to see what you've learned on your own," All Might smiled before he transformed into his buff form. Izuku was undoubtedly intimidated by this hulking form, but he reassured himself that he was actually making progress thanks to his training, and that he could in fact fight now. Taking a big breath in to calm his nerves, Izuku slipped off his tracksuit jacket, leaving him in only a tank top and his tracksuit pants. He lowered his body a little into his new fighting stance, now mentally and physically prepared to fight All Might. His somewhat crouched position gave All Might pause from how different his fighting stance was compared to their last fight. "Whenever you're ready, young Midoriya," All Might boomed as he gave a hearty closed-eye laugh. The instant that he had opened his eyes, Izuku had almost silently dashed forward with a speed that not even the hulking hero expected. All Might couldn't help but smile even more at the serious look on his protege's face as Izuku's right fist came flying towards his face. All Might had simply moved his head to the side to avoid Izuku's quick punch, but didn't manage to dodge the follow-up left knee that hit the hero directly in the jaw. Now trying to grab and restrain Izuku, All Might raised his arms up, but before he could even attempt to grab him, Izuku was already pushing off his chest with his free leg. As Izuku landed back on his feet after doing a quick backflip, expecting a strike from the large hero, he watched as All Might burst out into the most heartfelt laugh to date. My word. You have exceeded my expectations once again, young Midoriya. I had no idea you had such a fight with you. All Might boomed while Izuku nervously chuckled. Well, I didn't do it alone, Izuku said with a small stutter in his voice as he thought of Momo helping him out over the past week. Oh, do tell. All Might coaxed, hunting for his protege to tell him about the mystery person who helped him train in combat. Well, I met this girl Momo-chan, and he gained a little blush as more thoughts of Momo popped up in his head, making his nervous nature kick up to 11. My, I thought you were incredibly nervous around girls. Could it be that something makes this Momo girl special for you to so willingly talk to her? All Might asked with a slightly raised eyebrow. Izuku's blush began to grow until it consumed his whole face. I was kidding. Let us continue with your training. All Might laughed once more as Izuku quickly snapped back into his fighting stance, a blush still dusted across his face. All Might was the one to attack first now, leading with a heavy right punch that only just missed Izuku, but the shockwave was still strong enough to shake him. Pushing past that feeling, Izuku began to string together different variations of punches and kicks that were clearly messy, but All Might could tell that he would eventually get comfortable with this newfound fighting style. That was one thing that All Might knew he didn't have to worry about. Teaching Izuku different fighting styles. Mainly because his own style was very basic, so he wouldn't be much help to Izuku. And he was right, ever since Izuku began combat training, he had been researching various types of martial arts, taking moves, and either adding his own twist or incorporating other styles into it. Thankfully, because of Momo's training, Izuku had managed to work 2 different fighting styles, with a third in development. The first fighting style was a power style. A fighting style that didn't rely on precise movements and instead on brute force, so if he were to sustain an injury he could keep fighting. This style was recommended by Momo herself. The second style was his speed style. A fast, non-stop assault using many different attacks that didn't lack power, but weren't as heavy as the first style. The final fighting style though was merely a concept in Izuku's head. The spider style. A more end-goal style that would incorporate both previous fighting styles, along with more strategic use of his webbing. Believing he couldn't yet overpower All Might, the current fighting style Izuku was employing was the speed style. To at least test how good Izuku was when it came to quick dodging, All Might began to throw multiple light punches and slightly random points, but still accurate enough for them to hit if he didn't dodge. Thankfully All Might didn't have to worry, as Izuku's dodge ability had vastly improved since last time. He did stumble here and there, but it was still tremendous progress. Now to see how focused he can really be, All Might thought to himself as his punches became sharper and heavier with each passing second. Izuku was struggling, but he could at least keep up a solid enough defense to throw the occasional punch whenever an opening presented itself. However, because Izuku was so focused on his movements, he was completely thrown off when he heard All Might say, "Stop thinking about your girlfriend. You're unfocused." Shocked, he froze up with a completely bright red face. Wow. In an instant, Izuku's guard crumbled to nothing, surprising All Might as he had no idea his guard would fall so badly. Attempting to pull back as much as possible, All Might tried to stop his punch, but the momentum was too. With a loud impact, Izuku was sent flying through the air like a ragdoll before he skidded along the sand for several meters. Young Midoriya. Worry, concern, and guilt. These 3 things were circling around and around in All Might's head as he rushed towards his pupil. A shift in the sand, though, and he breathed a sigh of relief, Izuku's twitch revealing he still had life in his body. "Oh, thank goodness." All Might beamed. "I thought you had just young Midoriya." His relief at seeing the young boy alive was slowly taken over by a feeling of concern as the boy rose from the sand. Izuku was indeed standing, but his body seemed limp. His arms were just dangling by his sides, his back slightly hunched, and even his head was looking down at the sand. Before All Might could ask anything else, he saw his protege raise his head slowly with a dark look in his eyes. The hulking hero could tell immediately that right now, this wasn't Izuku. It was all in the eyes. Izuku's were bright, full of life and emotion, while his eyes right now were dark and empty. Without a single sound being uttered between the two, Izuku fell to his knees and violently convulsed, vomit. The ground in front of him. A sudden pause to the flow from his stomach and he'd fallen to his side, unconsciousness permeating his being. Is he okay? Of course he is, you idiot. We wouldn't be here if he wasn't. Precisely. If Izuku were not alive then we would cease to exist. And I have to stay here, I'm the best part of him. Izuku slowly roused thanks to the 4 familiar voices that surrounded him. As he began to open his eyes, he was met with a skull-splitting headache that forced him to keep his eyes squeezed shut. It would be best for you to rest more. You have suffered a very serious concussion. Now lying on his back in a currently unknown location, Izuku chose to ignore the advice because his head was in unbearable agony that confined him to a state of almost paralysis. After a minute or two of lying down in silence, the creaking and scraping of a metal door resounded through the mystery room, quiet footsteps following. He's stable, albeit very shaken up, but he'll recover within the next hour or two, a foreign tone reported beside Izuku. Thank goodness I thought I did more damage to the kid. Izuku could easily recognize the second voice as a deflated All Might. He tried to say hello or that he was okay, but all that came out was a small, inaudible grunt. Well, you gave the poor boy a concussion bad enough that it temporarily paralyzed him. And we don't know what kind of mental damage he sustained until he's conscious and recovered. Now hearing that they didn't know if he was okay mentally, Izuku tried to move or make a sound, but his efforts only forced himself back into unconsciousness. The next time Izuku felt any form of consciousness was when his shoulder was given a soft nudge. Hey kid, you okay? All Might's voice was full of concern as Izuku slowly opened his eyes and reached a hand to hold his aching skull. A lot better, thanks All Might, where exactly are we? Izuku questioned as he briefly took in his surroundings. It appeared he was in some sort of lab, his tank top and jacket carefully placed to one side of the room. He also gave a quick look down to see if he was injured, but thankfully saw no bandages or large bruises. We're at a lab that belongs to a friend of mine. He was the one who treated you for your concussion, All Might said with a very sympathetic look. Thankfully it wasn't too bad, but I only say that as we still have yet to find out if anything happened to you mentally, a voice claimed that a man entered the room dressed in a long white coat. Dr. Connors, said the scientist greeted with his left hand extended for a handshake. Izuku Midoriya, the curly-haired teen responded as he sat up and outstretched his own left hand. Upon closer inspection, he understood why he offered his left hand. Dr. Connors was missing his whole right arm. What do you need me to do? Izuku asked as he retracted his left hand, his right still holding his head. For now, just tell me what you remember, Dr. Connors said as he set a clipboard on a nearby table while Izuku thought back to his most recent memories. I remember fighting all. Izuku quickly paused and glanced at his mentor. The skeletal hero chuckled at Izuku's cautious behavior. It's fine, kid, he knows who I am. We went back a long time. Nodding, Izuku continued. I was fighting All Might on the beach, then I think I dropped my guard. After that it's all just black, Izuku confessed before asking, where are the other people that were here? Because I remember hearing other voices in the room earlier. Both adults looked at each other with concern in their eyes. Izuku could tell from their looks what they were thinking. There was nobody else here. Both All Might and Dr. Connors nodded slowly to his query while Izuku's eyes widened and he tried his best to keep calm. It's probably nothing to worry about. You might have been experiencing delusions while your brain was still dealing with that concussion, Dr. Connors assured the teen in an attempt to prevent him from freaking out more than he already was. Yeah, I guess you're right, Izuku breathed out in relief with a small smile on his face. We'll let you rest for the moment, but you're free to leave whenever. Dr. Connors collected his notes and moved to the exit with All Might in his wake. As the door softly closed behind the two adults, Izuku couldn't help but lie back down on the examination table to rest his brain a little more. Their brain is dealing with a concussion, what a load of crap. But the slightly hesitant expression on his face, Izuku slowly sat up and scanned the room with wary glances. The voice sounded familiar to him, but thanks to his head injury, he was really struggling to place it. That injury opened up a door for me, giving me access to the building blocks that make you, or perhaps I should say. The curly-haired teen kept looking around the empty room, a little scared now, as the voice was echoing around him. He'd surveyed the entire room before him, so turned to look behind, but when Izuku turned back straight, another person's face was situated directly in front of his own. Thus, the sudden scare made Izuku instinctively leap off the table and onto his own 2 feet as he stared in fright at what he assumed was an intruder crouching on the table. Izuku was at first confused by the intruder's words, but as he examined them, it started to make sense why they said us. The intruder was clearly in his teens with an outfit very much like his own, in fact it was exactly the same. Not only that, but everything was the same in comparison to himself. The only difference between himself and this doppelganger was that Izuku's eyes were a lot brighter in color and his hair was a lot more naturally curly. Izuku tried to speak, but the shock of what now stood in front of him was too great for him to process, though it didn't seem to matter, as the doppelganger already knew what he was about to say. What am I? I am you. Well, the better parts of you anyway. I didn't need all that doubt holding me back, the copy said as he sat on the examination table while Izuku slowly picked himself back up. Better parts? Izuku questioned in a subdued tone just loud enough for the doppelganger to hear. When that concussion hit, your inner defenses lowered, which allowed me to access the core parts of your personality. Intelligence, worry, anger, joy, sadness, courage, and anxiety. Those voices you heard earlier, all me. I thought it best to not take the things I didn't need. After that, it's a little fuzzy, but here I am, the, what Izuku now assumed to be, mental image stated, as it extended its arms out to either side. It's just like Dr. Connors said, it's just a side effect. This will pass. This will pass. This will pass. Izuku repeated to himself quietly as he held his head in his hands, trying to avoid having any form of panic attack. Oh, poor Izuku, you're freaking out now. Then I'm going to have a hell of a time with you. But that statement actually sending chills down his spine. Izuku quickly grabbed the rest of his clothes, dressing his top half before rushing through the door All Might and Dr. Connors had used earlier. Izuku was stopped though, as the doppelganger was now between him and the door with a smile still on its face. Oh no, you aren't going anywhere. I want what should be mine, the copy said, as it imitated donning gloves before promptly vanishing. Izuku's eyes darted around the room to try and find the thing in his head, but saw nothing. Suddenly, his eyes shot downwards to his body as an almost numbing sensation washed over his left arm. Staring at his now limp arm in worry, Izuku watched as his hand clenched and relaxed repeatedly. Not sure what to do, the teen used his right hand to grab his wrist and stop his left arm from moving on its own. "Get out of me," he shouted in wide-eyed fear as he started shaking where he stood. With full control of his body back, that thing seemingly somewhat complying with his desperate plea, Izuku wasted no time in charging towards the door in a silent internal panic. The two adults were a little startled by the teen's sudden entrance, but after seeing his expression, Dr. Connors quickly pointed to a door in the far left corner and a large square hole in the ceiling, stating, "That door will give you ground access, well, that vent will take you to." Not even able to finish his sentence, both adults watched as Izuku leapt up the vent, running up the wall while using web zips to keep him on the wall. Within the vent, a hatch opened up at the top, allowing Izuku out into the light. With a quick survey of his surroundings, Izuku quickly worked out he was only a quick 5-minute swing from Momo's and thought that maybe talking to her would calm him down. Sat on the balcony with a cup of gold tips imperial black tea at her side, Momo was lounging with a good book. She was happily reading away, occasionally looking up to take in the beautiful sights that her building provided. With a small smile, she did notice in one of her glances that a certain web-swinging individual was approaching at speed, but simply continued to read as he made his way over to her. After about 20 seconds, Momo could see Izuku slowly dropping down in front of her, upside down, dangling on a single thread of webbing. "Hi Midoriya-kun, I'm happy to see that you're getting more comfortable with your webbing. Anyway, what can I do for you?" Momo greeted me warmly as Izuku responded with a fake smile. "You wouldn't mind if I just stayed here for a few hours, would you?" Izuku asked the ponytailed teen. This already said a lot to her about how he was feeling, leading her to ask, "You had a rough day, didn't you?" Something like that. Setting down her book, Momo opened the glass door into her place and pointed to a corner room, stating, "Go in there, take a shower, and come out when you're feeling a little better." Izuku was a little surprised by such a kind gesture, but graciously accepted it nonetheless. I know she said her parents were rich and fancy, but this is something else, Izuku thought to himself, stunned, as he looked around the spotless bathroom that was probably twice as big as his bedroom. Slowly slipping out of his clothes and setting them by the door, Izuku turned on the water and kept back for a couple of seconds before stepping under the hot flow of water. As steam began to cloud around him, Izuku's mind and body relaxed into the warmth. It really didn't take long to wash himself. Izuku just couldn't help but stand under the shower head, letting his wet hair flatten and flow, covering his forehead and obscuring his vision. After a couple of minutes of therapeutic relaxation in hot water, Izuku slowly stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around his waist. He quickly realized that his training clothes had already been taken away from beside the doorframe, as, in their place, there was a new set of clothes lying neatly folded. After quickly drying himself off with a towel, Izuku put on the jeans and black. Loaned to him, exiting the bathroom to spot Momo back over at the balcony. "Thanks for letting me use your bathroom," Izuku thanked Momo as he pulled his shirt down fully, taking up the seat adjacent to hers. "Happy to be of assistance. I wasn't too sure on your measurements, so I hope those fit alright," Momo said with a slightly insecure tone, not too sure if Izuku was comfortable in the clothes she made. No. They're fine, Momo-chan, I swear." Izuku quickly reassured and watched her expression melt from worry to a soft smile. He looked away and occupied his eyes with the indoor area, a tad embarrassed by her smile, and something clicked in his head. "Why is it every time I've come here, I never see anyone else here?" Izuku asked, trying to carry on the flow of conversation as best he could. "That's because it's only me. My parents own the building. I just live here because it's an easier commute and I'm not the biggest fan of my parents' views, Momo explained with a soft sigh. The explanation left Izuku a bit speechless, as he didn't really have much experience he could draw from to assist with continuing the conversation. So how's your day been? Izuku awkwardly asked after a couple seconds of silence. Momo calmly responded, not too bad. Did a little exercise, did some studying, then I thought I'd enjoy some time alone out here reading this book. Oh, I didn't mean to. No, it's fine, I enjoy your company. That comment from Momo made Izuku's face flush red, as he couldn't help but hide the side of his face with his hand. Momo was momentarily puzzled by Izuku's sudden change in demeanor, but when she caught a glimpse of his face, she knew that he was simply embarrassed. Gently setting down her book, Momo turned back to Izuku. Do you mind me asking what happened in your day? Momo asked her curly-haired friend to try and snap him out of his embarrassment. Well, I had a training session first thing this morning to show my trainer how much I've improved on my own in terms of combat. But I guess I dropped my guard at one point and I suffered a major concussion apparently. A concerned expression spread over Momo's face and she shifted, about to examine him when Izuku realized his blunder. To reassure her, he quickly added, I'm fine now though, I swear. While she was no longer going to examine him, Momo was still concerned and decided to keep an eye out for him, as Izuku continued. After that, I met a friend of my trainer, but then I saw something which I want to believe is purely just a side effect of the concussion. But it bothered you so much that you wanted to come here, Momo gathered from the details in Izuku's story. Yeah, that's about it. Letting out a sigh in thought, as he looked out at the sunset, his head fell into his hands. Momo could feel the sadness starting to form inside of Izuku, so she slowly walked over towards him and wrapped her arms around his shrinking form so that she could hug him from the side. Izuku was surprised by the gesture, but he didn't feel embarrassed at all, he felt comforted. The two just stayed like that for a few minutes in a comfortable silence. Momo silently hoped that she was at least helping Izuku in some way. Izuku on the other hand was enjoying the kind warmth from Momo's hug, but after a while decided it was time to get some things off his chest, so he shifted his body slightly to wordlessly tell the other teen to stop hugging him. Thanks to that, Izuku thanked me, as he lifted his head up with a small smile. It was no problem at all, do you need anything else? Momo asked, still concerned for the curly-haired teen's mental well-being. Do you mind if I just talk? Izuku asked, as he gazed towards the skyline. No, of course not. A deep breath, and Momo was once again looking at Izuku with concern before he spoke. I feel completely fake. Everything I have was given to me. These powers are a complete accident. I wasn't supposed to be like this. I should still be the scrawny little nerd who gets picked on for being quirkless. Izuku didn't filter any of his thoughts, he just spoke how he felt and thought. Momo on the other hand was completely taken aback by Izuku's comment. He was quirkless. Yes, it was a big shock on its own, but the fact he was so insecure about these apparently gifted powers, it made sense why he never really vocalized how he felt. This isn't what I was. You became friends with whoever took over when I got these powers. I've been living behind a mask. Izuku's thoughts were clearly full of self-doubt, and Momo could sympathize with that. You're not behind a mask. You may have physically changed, but you're still you, so to me it seems like you were always this kind-hearted, Momo tried to reassure Izuku. All he could do was look at the floor and mull over her words when suddenly he felt his phone vibrate. As Izuku removed his phone from his pocket, Momo moved away and took her empty mug inside. Hello. Hey kid, do you mind coming back to Dr. Connor's lab? He's found something that he knows well, it's better that you hear it in person, All Might answered back over the phone. Izuku felt a small shudder of worry shoot through his system. Okay, but do you mind if I bring someone with me? Izuku asked, as he turned his head to look at Momo who was humming to herself while washing up a few dishes. That Momo girl that you spent 2 weeks training with. Knowing that All Might would worry about the privacy of information, Izuku tried to explain why he thought Momo would be fine. Yeah, I mean she knows that my spider powers aren't natural, and she's incredibly smart. She could more than likely assist Dr. Connors with his research, and I would trust her to know about your identity and keep it secret. There were of course a couple seconds of silence over the phone with All Might considering what his protege was asking of him, but with a small sigh, he told him, okay, I'll allow you to bring her along, but if she finds out too much, then you've got to be the one to talk her into not sharing anything. The grin on Izuku's face, he responded. Of course, I'll take full responsibility for anything that happens. Oh, and thank you as well, All Might, Izuku thanked as he hung up the phone. Finishing up cleaning the remaining dishes, Momo walked over to Izuku after having seen him finish his phone call. So, I'm guessing that you're gonna have to go, Momo started with a sad smile, but was surprised when Izuku smiled a little. Yes, but you can come with me. Dr. Connor's lab is only about 5 minutes away, and I don't think what I'll be told is good news. With a sad expression slowly showing itself on Izuku's face, Momo smiled and quickly spoke up. Well, let's get going then. If it's only 5 minutes, then I guess we'll get there by Fu. What are you doing? Momo began to talk as Izuku turned around and crouched down slightly. We're swinging there, Izuku simply stated with a small smile. Momo looked a little worried, asking, are you serious? I mean, I don't think that I'll be able to hold on while you. Just trust me. Please. Izuku smiled as Momo hesitantly got onto his back and wrapped her arms around his collar, and just as she opened her mouth to say something to him, Izuku leapt off the balcony, causing a surprised scream to shoot out her lungs. With her hold on Izuku tightening and eyes locked shut, Momo wanted to smack Izuku upside the head for giving her the biggest fright of her life. But, as she got used to it a little, her death grip loosened and she began to revel in the sensation of the wind brushing past her face and flowing through her hair. Momo's fear of falling faded steadily as she could feel a sense of reassurance from Izuku, who was currently sporting a cheeky smirk, adorned with an embarrassed blush. After a few more seconds, Momo shakily opened up her eyes and was shocked as she saw Izuku was swinging with as little lift as possible so that she would be safe. While she was flattered by the gesture, Momo was secretly loving the adrenaline and wanted to feel the sensation of when Izuku swung at his normal speed. If you want me to swing faster, then you better hold on tighter. Izuku shouted so that Momo could hear him. Following the advice, Momo tightened the lock her arms made and wrapped her legs around his waist so she wouldn't slip off. Now knowing she wanted a change in pace, Izuku began to pick up speed. Swinging with larger arcs than previous, he built up more and more momentum, throwing in the occasional fancy twister flip which at first scared Momo. However, as the adrenaline kicked in more with every swing, she couldn't help but laugh with every trick he pulled off. We're almost there. It's just around the next corner. Izuku shouted through the wind while Momo kept laughing from the adrenaline rush. Make a detour. This is amazing. Momo laughed in a tone that seemed so out of character for her that Izuku couldn't help but comply as he started to swing faster and harder through the concrete jungle. It was another hour until the two teens had swung onto the roof of Dr. Connor's secret lab. Momo climbed off Izuku, giggling to herself before shouting, "That was so much fun," in a bright and excited tone. Stiffening, she looked back at Izuku, realizing her actions, and straightened herself up, clearing her throat. "I mean that last hour was very enjoyable, thank you, Midoriya-kun," Momo said, trying to appear calm and collected while a faint hue of red was spread across her face in embarrassment. Izuku couldn't really help himself from smiling as a bit of Momo's true nature peeked out. The trapdoor to Dr. Connor's lab then opened, the two's presence on the roof obviously being noticed, so Momo held onto Izuku once more. A quick confirmation that she was ready, and he jumped down the hole. Using some webbing, he stuck to the top to rappel down the vent with control rather than fall. It didn't really take long at all for the two to reach Dr. Connor's lab as he welcomed them with a warm greeting. Momo removed herself from Izuku but was left in awe at all the astonishing scientific equipment that surrounded them. "So, I presume this isn't your completely fine call, is it?" Izuku quietly asked Dr. Connors while Momo happily enjoyed looking and reading everything in the lab. "I'm afraid so. While you were unconscious, I decided to take some blood samples considering the condition you were in. And just as you left, I found your blood is like nothing I've ever seen before." Dr. Connors started with a perplexed look on his face as he brought up two video feeds on one of his many computer screens. On the left there was a large quantity of red blood cells currently stationary that seemed perfectly normal. However, on the right side, the blood cells were pulsating and misshapen as small tinges of black rushed around the surface of the cells. "As you can guess, those cells are yours. They seem to have a connected entity bonded to them individually." The Oscrip scientist then brought out two vials that had risen out of the desk, one completely still and red, while the other was jet black. "Oh look, he split us apart." "Well, two tiny parts of us," a voice spoke into Izuku's ear, making him turn around because of the surprise. Once he saw his doppelganger standing there, smug like earlier, Izuku turned back to Dr. Connors. "This here is your mutated blood which currently contains so many unknown properties that I'll continue to research on. This on the other hand," he said as he raised up the black vial. "This is a completely separate entity with an almost symbiotic relationship with your cells." "Symbiotic? I really like that word." Izuku ignored the voice infecting his brain and asked something to the one-armed scientist. "Dr. Connors, what would happen exactly if that symbiote was to reach and inhabit my brain cells?" Suddenly, the doppelganger walked in front of him with a face that was no longer filled to the brim with confidence. "Whoa there, kid. You tell him about me and they're gonna try and separate us. I make you better, I make you stronger. All that crap about taking over your body, I was kidding, the doppelganger insisted to Izuku, while Dr. Connors still looked deep in thought about what Izuku asked. From what I've been told from you-know-who, and from how this symbiote seems to be working inside you, I do not have much of a guess as to what it'll do, but it seems to be purely beneficial at the moment. Unless there's something wrong you know about. Izuku glanced over at the mentally materialized symbiote consciousness. The confident demeanor that it once held had crumbled to nothing, as it was now on its knees begging. "Please, I won't try and take over your body. I'm on my knees here," the symbiote begged, making Izuku actually feel sympathy for it. "No, there's nothing wrong that I can think of," Izuku said to the scientist, who put the black vial back away into the desk, while the red vial was inserted into another machine at his desk. "I also got some items from the main Tokyo branch of Oscorp and figured they would be beneficial for your training." Dr. Connors smiled as he pulled out 2 suitcases and handed them to Izuku. "What are they?" Izuku asked out of curiosity. "Those are a training weight set that we sell off to militaries." Izuku opened up the first case to see an extremely thin shirt and arm and leg sleeves that seemed incapable of having any decent weight. "They cultivate the body more than normal while training. I simply tweak the limiter so that they would be more suited to your superhuman abilities," Dr. Connors explained. "This, on the other hand, is a lightweight bodysuit designed to allow full flexibility and movement whilst keeping your body temperature at peak performance level." Now pulling out the bodysuit from the remaining suitcase, Izuku saw that this gift was a little thicker than the weight set and had a very small hexagonal pattern sewn into the fibers. "Wow, thanks Dr. Connors. This will really allow me to push myself," Izuku said like an excited child that was opening up Christmas presents. "No need to thank me, I'm just happy to be of assistance. Oh, that reminds me, you can test them out in the room you were in earlier. Everything is cleared out of there, so it should be to your liking. Just knock on one of the walls when you're ready." With the offer being clearly displayed to him, Izuku took both cases into the big chamber. "So, there's something living inside him," Momo said, as she walked over to Dr. Connors. It shocked Dr. Connors that she knew, but he assumed that she must have been listening in. "Yes, but it does appear to be only a beneficial being at the moment." The two heard a faint knock on the metal wall in front of them, leading the one-armed scientist to press a button under the countertop in front of him. Without a sound, the grey wall became transparent like glass, and the two of them were able to observe what was inside without entering the room. Momo almost instantly lit up red with embarrassment at the sight of Izuku in the very form-flattering, skin-tight suit that only left his head, hands, and feet exposed. The device that controls the weight should be in the case. "It should have the appearance of a standard smartwatch," Dr. Connors announced, as he spoke into a microphone, earning a nod from Izuku. "So, Momo, what is your take on Izuku's situation?" I know he's happy with his newfound powers and abilities, but he's still incredibly insecure with the physical changes. He believes that when he got his powers, he became an entirely new person," Momo stated, as the both of them watched Izuku practice his fighting moves. "Ah, so he's having doubts about his abilities," Dr. Connors replied with a sense of realization in his tone. "You see, Izuku grew up in a very negative environment. He's been bullied, mocked, and isolated to this day by his peers and those around him, simply because of who he is and things he cannot help. Even his mother shot down his dreams when he was only 4, leaving him with this permanent scar on his heart," Dr. Connors recounted, trying to recall as much as he could remember from what All Might told him. He then turned to face Momo fully, countenance serious. "From what I can assume, you're his first genuine friend." Momo was shocked to hear that someone who's usually so happy had gone through so much neglect in his life. "But at least his powers will make him realize his true potential," Momo stated in a hopeful tone. Dr. Connors remained silent as they both returned to watching Izuku train, using his web zips along with a variety of attacks to build more on his spider style. The silence was eventually broken though when Dr. Connors offered an option to Momo. "What if you were to have the same power to realize your potential? What if you were to have the same power to realize your potential?" "What?" The question from the Oscorp scientist left Momo shocked and at a complete lack of words as he brought up the screen of Izuku's blood again. "I believe that what happened to Izuku can be replicated, and if it can be replicated, then it could be possible to heal wounds thought to be impossible," Dr. Connors added, while his left arm instinctively reached for the right side of his body. While this did clear up a little bit of Momo's confusion, it still remained in her mind. "But why me? You work at Oscorp, don't you? Why can't you get someone from there to be your guinea pig?" Momo retorted with a small hint of venom in her tone. "I know it sounds bad, but trust me when I say this. If any company or government finds out he was artificially given such power, then he would be taken apart, piece by piece. If you let me do this without Oscorp's intervention, then this can be used for good. And I can warranty Izuku's safety." Momo didn't think of that. Izuku wasn't born with his quirk, he acquired it by unnatural means. And with his strength, speed, and senses, he'd be the equivalent of a super soldier. They wouldn't care about the repercussions for Izuku, they would just do what they had to get what they wanted. Now that she heard it like that, the request didn't sound as insane. I'm going to do some animal testing when you two leave, so that I can confirm that this is safe to do, but I wouldn't have suggested this if I wasn't at least 95% sure to begin with. Well, we should at least tell Midoriya. We can't even risk knowing Izuku. I'm sorry, Momo, but if you agree to this, it never leaves us, Dr. Connors insisted with a completely serious tone. Can I at least think this over? Momo asked, as the options kept swirling around in her head. Of course, I'm going to need at least a week to make a serum suitable for human trials, so please take your time. Just call this number when you've reached a decision. Handing Momo a piece of paper with a phone number written on it, the Oscorp scientist then quickly hit all the tabs on Izuku's blood, as said teen was on his way back in. That suit is amazing, Dr. Connors. It will double my training productivity. Izuku gushed as he was putting on his casual clothing on top of his new suit. I'm glad to hear that. Please let me know if there's anything else you need to help with your powers. Izuku immediately knew that some web shooters that would filter his webbing to make it stronger would be ideal, but thought that asking right away might seem a bit rude. No, nothing worth mentioning at the moment, but thank you for the offer. Izuku smiled before he moved over to underneath the vent. Momo quickly moved onto his back so she could get out and clear her head. Thank you again, Dr. Connors. Izuku waved before he leapt up the vent with Momo letting out a small yelp as he did so. After a quick drop-off at Momo's place, Izuku was now web-swinging and rooftop running across Tokyo to head home as darkness was beginning to fall on the city. Izuku eventually took a quick break and landed on a nearby rooftop breathing at an irregular pace. It's weird being tired, but not being even the slightest bit sweaty. Izuku chuckled to himself as he sat down on the concrete roof. You're tired because you never turned off the weights, you idiot, the symbiote image said, appearing in front of Izuku. That's because they don't actually weigh anything, they just simulate the effect of weight through muscle stimulation, Izuku explained as he double-tapped the weight control to deactivate it. We need to set some ground rules, Izuku insisted with a serious tone in his voice. Whoa, okay, lighten up a little, will ya? The symbiote image said, looking a little offended while defensively raising up its hands. Given our previous interactions, and Threatsy might add, can you blame me for being a little cautious? Izuku quickly retorted, making his mirrored image scratch the back of its head with guilt. You have a point, but can I at least explain myself before you try anything? Izuku did hesitate in his response, as the symbiote's actions and words were a lot different compared to when it first showed up. Okay, please explain yourself, Izuku said with some reluctance. Right, so it took me a few hours to gather all my memories and also go through some of yours, but when we first gained consciousness my instincts just screamed at me to take over your body. And I planned to do it again while we were with that Momo girl, but as you were talking to her I started to look into your memories and saw everything you've gone through. I guess you could say I became more human experiencing what you have. Izuku was more than a little shocked to hear that from what he assumed originally was a psychotic entity living in his head. So you've learned that what you did was wrong? Izuku asked to try and gauge if everything he was being told was true or not. Yeah, and besides, we would be much better trying to work together rather than fighting for control every second, the symbiote laughed while now sitting in midair. So, what exactly do I call you? Izuku asked, as he kept thinking that the name Parasite or Symbiote didn't really seem like a good enough name. Don't know. I did like the sound of symbiotic, that's it. You may now refer to me as Kaise, Master of Voices, the newly named Kaise proclaimed proudly with its arms spread out. Too much. I sensed it was too much, Kaise followed up, as I saw Izuku's expression. I like Kaise though, it's a good fit, Izuku commented, as Kaise began to spin in the air with a big grin on its face. You know, being in your head isn't actually that bad. I know that once you begin trusting me, we can start alternating control. And why would I allow you control? No offense. Hoping not to offend the other consciousness, Izuku tried to remain cautious about what he said. None taken, kid, but let's face it. You are way too uptight and logical. I, meanwhile, am laid back and reliant on instinct, Kaise began. That whole thing with Bakugo, for example. You're welcome, by the way. You would have gotten a black eye if it weren't for me. That's completely true. Izuku tried to defend himself, but failed as he quickly realized that Kaise was absolutely correct. So maybe if I build up a sense of trust with you, you might consider switching control when needed. Kaise asked with a hopeful look on its face while extending out an imaginary hand. Okay, but it's going to take some time. Izuku extended his own hand to shake Kaise, who seemed relatively pleased with the deal. Fine by me. As the next day rolled around, Izuku decided to keep the training sleeves on so that he could strengthen himself whilst still at school. Thankfully the weights on their own weren't very thick at all, so they could be easily hidden. While he made sure the weighted gear was always on him, Izuku also made sure he always had a set of casual clothing and his new suit from Dr. Connors in his bag, considering he was always going straight to Momo's after his classes were done. It became the norm for Izuku to come home late, but Inko didn't question it. Her son was happy for the first time in a long time and she didn't want to take that away from him. Classes themselves actually became a little more tolerable due to Kaise, and more importantly, Momo. Kaise had all of his memories and knowledge, just a different personality, so with it literally floating over his head, he never ran into any errors because Kaise kept fixing them, as Izuku thought of them. However, it didn't help that the conscious symbiote kept making fun of everyone in his class. Momo on the other hand was the one keeping him up throughout the day. Due to them having near identical class times, they were able to text each other between classes. Most commonly the two would talk to each other over the phone during their lunch breaks. All those little things topped with him visiting Momo actually left Izuku in a positive state of mind. It was actually the happiest he had been in God knows how long. Even though a week passed, everything seemed to be going fine until the end of the last class on Friday. Izuku was leaving the school, Kaise floating beside him, as the irritating consciousness it was. Finally, I don't know how you deal with that place. It's not that bad, Izuku said with a small amused smile before being cut off by Kaise, who was now looking forward with a cautious expression. Heads up, Bakugo's followers straight ahead. Taking the warning, Izuku glanced up to see two of the tougher looking people in his class looking right at him. Thanks for the heads up, Izuku said mentally, making a left to avoid them. Hey, you're getting better with the whole mental talking crap, Kaise said, somewhat impressed by its host while still on the lookout. Izuku's face then indicated like he was saying something, but Kaise heard nothing. Nope, now you suck again, Kaise joked before giving another scan to realize what was going on. We're cornered and surrounded, fantastic, Kaise sighed as he watched Izuku turn his way into a dead end before turning around to be met by Bakugo himself with him behind him. Hey Kachin, how are you? Izuku asked nervously, trying to at least figure out why he was being confronted in such a manner. Shut up. I'm getting sick of you. It's been almost 2 months and you've changed too much. I see you walking around on your phone with a shitty ass smile and you laughing to yourself. So either you're hiding something or you've finally lost it. Either way, I'm fucking sick of it. Bakugo's rage-filled screams were sharply interrupted as Izuku's phone began to ring in his pocket, making him regret not putting it on vibrate. Holding him was the only thing that left Bakugo's mouth as he commanded the smirking teens behind him. Izuku could feel his spider sense going wild in his head but chose to ignore it, seeing, as he may, as well deal with what he had coming. While his arms were pinned behind his back and he was forced onto his knees, Izuku looked down at the ground as his phone was taken from his person. Izuku, what the hell are you doing? You know that you can take these morons, right? Kaise asked, trying to avoid yelling into Izuku's face as he knelt down to the same eye level as his host, only to be met with silence. Who the fuck is Momo-chan? Bakugo shouted as he read the contact on Izuku's phone screen out loud, seeing the picture of her smiling softly as the icon. It was Izuku's personal favorite picture that she had willingly given him a few days ago. She's a friend of me, Izuku tried to explain to him but was quickly cut off by Bakugo laughing. You're fucking kidding me, right? Why would a hot eye like her ever want to be friends with you? She must be one hell of a dumb bitch to be friends with you. The second Izuku heard Bakugo dare to even utter the word bitch, Izuku felt a strong surge of rage flooding through his system. His teeth ground together as his muscles tended to leap at Bakugo, but forced himself back knowing that it would probably be better for him to stay down. Did I hit a nerve? Good. Because a quirkless shit like you is too desperate to think pity from others is actually friendship. Which probably explains why you care so much about this dumb cunt. Bakugo never had a chance to finish that sentence as Izuku violently broke out of his hold, pushing the two holding him back against the wall hard. The second they were off him, Izuku didn't even hesitate to throw a devastating punch that hit Bakugo square in the face and sent him to the floor. There was a stunned silence from everyone who saw just what Izuku did to the blonde teen, even Kaise, and Izuku himself was shocked at his sudden snap of rage. Izuku couldn't even stop himself from speaking out with a small sense of regret. Oh crap. Bakugo began to pick himself up from the ground, growling like a wild beast. He slammed his fist into the concrete, turning towards Izuku with a bloody nose and a bruise beginning to form on the side of his face as he growled out to Izuku, "You're gonna fucking regret that." Yes. That was brilliant. Now pummel him to the fucking ground. Give him what he deserves. Kayase encouraged its host, but Izuku hesitated and instead just grabbed his phone and dashed past Bakugo in an attempt to escape him, but that also failed. "I will fucking end you." The enraged teen used his explosive quirk as propulsion before violently grabbing Izuku's shoulder and returning the punch, sending Izuku onto the floor like he was seconds ago. Bakugo didn't show any form of hesitation or mercy to Izuku as he flipped the curly-haired teen onto his back before just wailing on him. An onslaught of punches and point-blank explosions assaulted Izuku for several minutes while he tried to defend himself as best he could with his arms raised up. "Come on, kid. Fight back. You know you can overpower him, easy." Kayase shouted at Izuku only to get no response at all. "You can teach him a lesson. Make him pay for what he's done to you." Kayase yelled this time, seeming to get impatient. "At least stand up for yourself." After a few minutes, Bakugo tired himself out from beating the hell out of Izuku and got off him before turning back and kicking Izuku straight in the stomach and again in his chest before storming off. The currently burned, bruised, and battered Izuku tried to sit himself up but fell back down, letting out a loud pain grunt as he clutched his chest in agony, looking up to Kayase with pleading eyes. "I'll mildly fix your ribs so you can move, but I'm not healing you more than that. You've got to learn the consequences for not defending yourself," Kayase said with arms crossed and an expression that just said it wasn't impressive at all. "That's fine." Izuku hissed in pain as he picked himself up and leaned against a nearby wall to keep himself from collapsing before mustering enough strength to start walking well, limping. In the 3 weeks that Momo had known Izuku, she realized something that she never had the chance to recognize in the past. Her life was boring. Sure, she had money to her family name, but that meant absolutely nothing when it made her miserable as all hell. Because all the schools she's been to have been full of self-absorbed assholes, she never associated with any of them at all. Even the ones who seemed nice were just abusing that nice exterior to get to others' money. And even while she was commonly reading by herself at school, home life was no better. Her parents showed little to no care regarding her becoming a hero or what she wanted in general. Her mother cared in terms of her well-being and being a proper lady according to her, but she only humored Momo when it came to her dreams as a hero. Her father on the other hand was very clear on his opinions regarding his daughter seeing, as he was a very blunt business-oriented man. He was also very clear when it came to Momo's relationships, as he still believed in the recently reformed arranged quirk marriages. That last reason was why Momo insisted on living by herself at such an age, because they wanted to control almost every aspect of her life. Another aspect that bore her massively was the lack of a challenge, and yes, while it seemed selfish, Momo was sick that while she focused on her training as a hero, everyone else was worrying if their hair was perfect or not. It got very tiring very quickly. But once Izuku literally swung into the picture, he presented a much more interesting aspect to her life. For once, she met someone who not only knew nothing about who she was, but he provided a major challenge for her, both in terms of combat and intellect. The issue with Izuku was that his skill, strength, and speed rapidly improved in such a small time frame that she struggled to even keep up with him. Momo would quickly be finding herself completely out of breath and exhausted, whilst Izuku would have only worked up a light sweat. The challenge that appeared from Izuku's presence became more like an impossible target Momo fully understood she could never reach. But the offer Dr. Connors made to her kept going through her head at every waking moment. She could have equal ground with Izuku. She wouldn't be dragging him down with her lack of power. She could stand beside him and not in another shadow. Maybe it'll be better to accept it for scientific purposes. Obviously, Momo clearly lied to herself as she uttered those few life-altering words. As she was looking at her phone, though, she couldn't help but be a little jittery since Izuku hadn't picked up his phone for the last 40 minutes, which was completely unheard of for him. Maybe she was just overthinking it all. Maybe he just got a little busy. That's perfectly acceptable considering how hectic his life was. Ding. It was almost worrying how fast Momo's head turned towards her elevator as the ding of someone arriving made her jump out of her seat. With a slow breath in and back out, Momo walked towards said elevator, hiding her inner concern. As the metal doors slid open, Momo's attention was immediately drawn to the fact Izuku was slumped against the side wall with his hood up so that his face wasn't even that visible to her. "Midoriya-kun, are you okay?" Momo asked in a highly concerned tone while Izuku forced himself to walk without support. "I'm fine, don't worry." Momo could see it was a blatant lie, considering his legs were shaking like he could barely stand on his own 2 feet. That became less of an observation and more fact as after a few steps, Izuku collapsed onto the floor, letting out a variety of pained noises. "Izuku?" Momo couldn't help herself from instinctively calling out his first name in concern as she rushed to his side. Worried about how bad the damage was, Momo quickly lifted him off the ground before carrying Izuku over to one of her softer couches and laying him down on his back. "What happened to you?" Momo asked as she quickly scanned Izuku's body for any lethal injuries, but in that process saw that his training weights were still on from the smartwatch he was wearing. "You idiot," was the only thing Momo said as she let out a sigh before deactivating the weights, making Izuku cough out violently as his whole body relaxed into a near unconscious state. Seeing the curly-haired teen relax and not seem in such intense pain anymore, Momo began to remove Izuku's clothing one by one, leaving only his trousers on his person. Momo's eyes saddened as she saw the large amount of bruising on his chest. It was obvious from the skin alone that he was suffering from mass amounts of internal bleeding. "It's not as bad as it looks, I hope." The faint voice from Izuku brightened up Momo's face as she let out a big sigh of relief, making Izuku smile before she smacked his uninjured arm. "What on earth were you thinking? What did you think was such a good idea to get you fissured? And why are you hurt? I thought you could heal." All the sudden questions were too much for Izuku to handle at that moment, so just went from the beginning of the problem. All the while Momo began to make bandages and wrap Izuku in them. "After my last class, I was cornered by Kachin." "You mean Kitsuki Bakugo, the guy who bullied you for years?" "Yeah, that's him." Izuku was a little surprised that she remembered him mentioning Bakugo, but continued. "Anyway, I was cornered by Kachin and his friends. They held me in place, and Kachin saw my phone when you called and he said things about you, and I couldn't help but react. I realized what I was doing, then I got beaten up like this." Izuku began to explain before he tried to think of a way to explain Kayase without actually explaining it. But he knew it was wrong to lie to Momo. "And I haven't been healing because the symbiote inside me just wanted to prove a point. I may have lied a little when Dr. Connors asked me if there was something wrong when it came to the symbiote." Momo's eyes were just filled to the brim with concern as she listened to Izuku. "Since my whole concussion episode, the symbiote gained a form of consciousness and it's been chatting away in my head until I threatened it out of my head. After that we came to an agreement where we would agree to help each other to stay alive. Its name is also Kayase. Speaking of which, I need to show something to you when we get home as well." Kayase chimed into its host, which Izuku briefly nodded to before Momo spoke. "I presume it talked to you during the whole situation, encouraging you to at the very least defend yourself, which led to it refusing to heal you. Am I correct?" "Yeah, you pretty much got it spot on," Izuku replied with a strong sense of guilt in his voice that was met with a swift smack on his right arm. "You complete idiot." With each emphasized word, an additional hit was made onto Izuku, with Momo looking upset and annoyed at the same time. "Izuku, I know about the isolated childhood you had for being quirkless that made you question and doubt everything about yourself, but you need to actually believe in standing up for yourself. The fact that you went out of your way to defend me by punching that delinquent shows that you want to protect others, but you have to protect and look after yourself for the sake of those closest to you." Izuku just sat there in silent guilt because he knew that Momo was right. His first instinct when it came to anything was to blame himself or just take it because it was probably his fault anyway. "Midoriya-kun, you should probably go home and make sure you heal up. You can't let your mother worry," Momo insisted as she finished up with the bandages. "Yeah, and I should probably walk too, think things over." Thankfully, feeling Kayase start to kick in his healing factor, Izuku lifted himself up off the couch before slipping back into his clothes. "At home safe. And get some rest." Momo started with a concerned tone before shouting the last part as he left. His mind was contemplating everything both Kayase and Momo told him, along with rethinking what exactly he was doing to himself. Maybe all his doubt and insecurities were why he was such an easy target. He made himself a target. Maybe these powers were a sign for him to change, for him to perhaps approach with a lighter view. Izuku's train of thought was promptly disrupted as Kayase appeared beside him, pretending to walk with him. "Hey kid, so on, no hard feelings, right?" Shrugging his shoulders, Kayase looked at his host, who just gave a small smile back. "Yeah, we're good. You had good intentions, after all," Izuku replied as he swiftly moved his hood over his head due to the drizzle of rain now descending. "By the way, why do you keep calling me kid? You're technically younger than me," Izuku questioned Kayase, earning a shoulder shrug. "I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't know much about me. I mean, I'm still finding out abilities by the day," Kayase explained as he gave up walking and hovered beside Izuku with his arms behind his head. "Might be time to start swinging, kid." Seeing the clouds above getting darker by the second, Kayase warned his host as he was about to turn into an alley. "Yeah, not a bad idea." Izuku froze on the spot as a couple dozen feet in front of him were two darkly clothed thugs pushing a beaten up man against a wall as he called for help. "Okay, time for a different all. We're saving him." Izuku's near immediate response somewhat shocked Kayase as he knew that intercepting a crime clearly would brand him a vigilante if he was caught. "Okay kid, I know me and Momo were just on your ass about protecting yourself, but this is different. This is borderline breaking the law from what I can get from your head. No, the timing of this is more than a coincidence. Don't you think it's just a little too convenient that you both told me to protect myself, and now there's someone who can't protect themselves right in front of me? And I can't just stand here when I now know for a fact I can do something. Izuku declared with a confidence that even he was shocked to hear, as he continued. Hearing that crime is so frequent yet being constantly told to do nothing even when I know I have the power here, and now to stop this it's frustrating. But the clenched fist, and his heart pounding in his chest, pumping adrenaline through his body at a million miles an hour. Izuku with a hidden determined expression, marched towards the two criminals noticing their quirks. One of them had hands that morphed into metal razor blades, while the other was just a large brute of a man. It was quite clear to see that these two together were clearly a very intimidating duo. Isa was about to suggest a strategy to his host, because if his host was going through with this, then he'd like to keep existing. But before he could do that, you know, if you're going to mug someone, maybe don't dress like a mugger. Completely shocked, Kaisei just watched how this normally shy and full of insecurities kid had pulled a complete 180 and was cracking jokes. That lost kid. Unless you want to be next. The bladed thug threatened, making his other hand into a blade pointing it at Izuku, while the brute slammed his fist into the palm of his hand. Well, guess I should get straight to the point. That last word from Izuku was said whilst he fired a web shot at one of the blades, sticking his hand to the brick wall. Taking advantage of the brute's large and heavy frame, Izuku used his speed to dash past the brute and wall run for a single second. In that single second, Izuku used his momentum and the height of his wall to kick the trapped thug in the side of the head, knocking him out instantly. Even as he landed low on the ground, Izuku shot another web shot at the blade thug's other hand, just to be safe. Whoa, so you actually had a plan, Kaisei said with shock as he looked at the incapacitated thug. Izuku ignored that little comment and dashed towards the brute firing rapid-fire web shots, trapping his arms in place. But before he got too close, he leapt as high as he could into the air firing a single web line. That web line attached to the legs of the brute as he was quickly pulled up into the air, upside down. As the hooded teen landed back onto the ground, he fired a few additional shots of webbing to secure the large criminal in the air. "You alright?" Izuku asked with a concerned tone as he turned to the victim who looked more shocked and amazed than scared. After getting a shaky nod of confirmation, Izuku's expression quickly darkened as he heard sirens rapidly approaching. In a small panic he went into a burst of web zips and swung to leave the scene while he announced to himself and the victim, "Time to run." He was almost immediately met with his mental image counterpart laughing as he followed his host through the air shouting. "You're the only one running, kid. I can fly." Opening his front door slowly and carefully, Izuku pulled down his hood. Scanning the room, he spotted his mother sitting down on the couch. Thankfully he knew that he wasn't late. This wasn't the latest that come in, so he was fine. After a quick greeting to his mother, Izuku slipped into his room still grinning away to himself while Kaisei materialized in front of him. "Okay, first. What the hell was that?" "I don't know. It was like when the adrenaline hit me, my brain was kicked into high gear," Izuku explained as he went through the whole situation in his mind over and over again. "So that explains the fighting. What it doesn't explain is why you were spouting out jokes like it was nothing," Kaisei asked with his arms now crossed. "I guess in the moment I thought back to what All Might told me. About how he smiles to hide his own fear and bring hope to others in the bad situation," Izuku said with a grin still plastered on his face. "Well, as much as I want to complain about you actually doing an alright job out there," Kaisei admitted with a sense of defeat in his tone. "Thanks. That doesn't mean I didn't think it was an incredibly dumb plan." Quickly cutting off his proud host, Kaisei glared at him for a good few seconds before he pointed directly at Izuku. "Take your clothes off, but for the love of my existence keep your underwear on." Izuku was immediately confused with the request, but slowly complied anyway. "Okay, now what?" Izuku asked only for Kaisei to point at the sharp corner of his desk. "Cut your hand, and after you do not freak out." Izuku hesitated as he did it but hovered his hand over the sharp corner and with a swift swipe made a cut the size of his thumb in terms of length. Izuku couldn't help making a sharp hissing sound from the instant of pain, but it thankfully subsided quick enough. "Like I said, don't freak out." After Kaisei said that one last time, Izuku watched as a black liquid began to slowly seep out of the cut and cling to his hand. With every second that passed, more of this liquid spread across his body until it eventually covered all of him like an additional layer of skin, except for the cut-off point on his neck. Just before Izuku was about to comment on the last 20 seconds, he noticed that the suit began to take the shape of a fabric that was almost identical to the training outfit that Dr. Connors gave him. I will admit, it took me a while to figure out I could mimic clothing and fabrics, but I believe that it'll save a lot of time. As a whole, Kayase explained, as Izuku jumped onto the ceiling, sticking on all fours, which earned another perked up tone from Kayase. Yeah, you guessed your sticky power cell wrong as well. It's not from the hairs, it's based on electrons which you were stopping because of your thick-ass rubber-soled shoes. Now that it was pointed out to him, that explanation of his powers made far more sense than his original analysis. But a better idea came across his mind as Izuku asked the symbiote a question. Can you change this suit's color and design? As darkness fell over Tokyo, in the hidden lab belonging to Dr. Connors, said scientist smiled to himself as he watched 3 rats cuddling along the ceilings of their glass cages as if it were a natural thing. As he finished writing up a few more results, he heard his phone go off on his desk. Hello? He answered with a curious tone as he didn't recognize the number. Dr. Connors began to bring up the building's security feed, but stopped when he realized the voice that greeted him with a soft hi. Dr. Connors belonged to Momo Yaoyorozu. Ah, Momo. So nice of you to call. Is this regarding my experiment? Already getting his equipment together, he listened as the teen responded. Yes, I'm actually outside the building right now. I let you in right away, Connors stated as he pressed a few keys on his computer, opening the door up for Momo as she entered the building while the disinfected syringe was being filled with the spider serum. Being cautious and not wishing to have a possibly murderous symbiote inside her system, Momo asked the scientist as she entered his lab, just so I know now, did Midoriya-kun suffer from any symptoms at all? From what Izuku told me, it would seem that you'll feel normal for a little bit. Eventually, a heavy drowsiness will evolve, then after you pass out, you'll be hit by a heavy wave of nausea before passing out again. After that, you'll wake up to a body transformation and powers. But then again, it could be different for you, Connors explained, as he did his best to remember what Izuku told him. Body transformation. What exactly should I be expecting? Momo asked with a twinge of nervousness in her tone. The best way to describe it would be like an overnight maturity. When I first looked at Izuku's cells, he had traits and cellular patterns only common in someone in their very late teens. But after further study, I found his cells had also slowed down in their decomposition rates. Now bringing up a side-by-side video of Izuku's cells and another set of cells, Momo could see that he was right. My theory is that whatever mutation in Izuku's cells happened, it took advantage of a human's evolutionary adaptive rate and matured him physically to around an early prime age of about 18 or 19, then slowed down the rate to keep him there years longer than he should. Momo thought about it for a second, and if she took away Izuku's mannerisms and usual nervousness, then she could easily see him as an older teen with his physique. Okay, that's answered all of my concerns. Let's make this quick before I change my mind, Momo insisted as she stuck out her right arm and faced the other way so that she didn't feel as anxious. Oh, I should mention, as well, that this isn't an injection of Izuku's DNA. This is cellularly mutated spider DNA that should mutate your own cells in a similar way. This injection, however, is diluted enough for your body to kill it after a week or so, the one-armed scientist added. Why would you tell me? Just in case you were ever concerned about having a relationship with him, Connors finished his statement, making Momo bright red in the face. Dr. Connors took note of that. Quickly getting on to the main reason for her visit, he hovered the modernized Oscarp injector over Momo's arm and slowly inserted the needle into her arm as she flinched at the feeling. Once certain that the needle was in her bloodstream, Connors pulled a small trigger on the injector, shooting the serum into her bloodstream near instantly. Due to the whole injection being so quick, Momo herself was unsure if she even got injected with anything to begin with. She didn't feel any different either. It takes a little bit for the formula to kick in. It's probably best if you head home. Be in a comfortable environment and all. Dr. Connors explained as he began to clean up his equipment. Okay, and thank you, Dr. Connors. Nonsense. I should be the one thanking you. You've just helped me make leaps and bounds with my research. Smiling away to himself in a cheery mood, the Oscarp scientist watched Momo leave before bringing up the same formula for the serum he just used while a strand of reptilian DNA was being scanned and implemented the said formula. Okay, 5th time's the charm. Kayase sighed in annoyance as the suit attached to Izuku began to morph momentarily before its texture smoothed out completely while patterns began to form. On the underside of Izuku's arms were a dark green color that reached along the sides of torso and ran down the outer sides of his legs, going down to his feet. On this underside of green, however, were thin black lines that almost gave a streamlined design of webbing. The chest and back, however, were more obvious with the arachnid theme, as dead center of Izuku's chest was a large spider insignia that had legs going across his ribs and sides to converge again at the back. While the back also had a spider insignia, it wasn't as large or as flashy as his chest, but it still looked absolutely spectacular. Perfect. Izuku smiled to himself as he looked at himself in the mirror, angled so he could see his whole body. Wait, what are we going to do about my face? Because we don't exactly have a mask, do we? Izuku questioned as he became concerned for his identity. One sec, I already had that covered, Kayase quickly stated as it wiggled its fingers and made a noise as the suit began to reach up and cover Izuku's face, leading him to close his eyes for a second. As he opened up his eyes, Izuku could see the Kayase had formed a mask over his head and face in the same material that covered his body, but around his eyes were two green lenses that were shaped into a large set of eyes. Izuku also moved his eyes as well and noticed that his mask's eyes followed the exact same movements. I figured that you've got to have some way of emoting behind a full mask, Kayase explained to its host whilst said boy began to move towards the window. No, Kayase quickly spoke up as the hands of Izuku's suit turned to a liquid and attached to the floor to stop him in his place before speaking once more. I'm allowing this whole spider vigilante crap, but if you are 1000% sure about this, then you've got to learn how to fight properly. Izuku couldn't help but feel that Kayase had a point as he was perhaps being a little too eager regarding this whole vigilante thing. Okay, did you have any fighting styles in mind? Izuku asked with a clear tone of curiosity whilst his suit returned to its original shape. Actually kid, I have two in mind. Actually, over the week whilst you slept, I took the liberty of learning your planet's culture and peculiar creations, Kayase stated in a tone that left Izuku wondering if he should dare be brave enough to look at what things the symbiote searched on his computer. Anyway, through research I found out one of your planet's most practical and effective fighters went by Bruce Lee. His Jeet-Kune-Do style is a minimal movement with maximum effectiveness style that uses adaptability in a fight. Wait, I looked into that style, but deemed it inferior and too time consuming to learn due to it being more like a philosophy than a martial art, Izuku interrupted as he realized why the name sounded familiar. Yes, but when this is mixed with something like say capoeira martial arts, Kayase smirked as its finger pointed to Izuku's computer. Izuku quickly searched up the martial art before realizing what Kayase was going on about as he pulled the mask off his face and began to mumble. Of course, a martial art that focuses on flips, speed, strength and unpredictability to take opponents down. How did I miss this? Using the minimal movement of Jeet-Kune-Do alongside this creates a borderline perfect style to adapt to both my surroundings and opponents. Not only that, but with a style like this, I'll easily be able to incorporate my webbing to make it even more adaptable. But wait, how do you expect me to learn these two styles just like that? These two complex styles take years to learn and even longer to master. Izuku's question, along with a snap of his, well, that lot didn't have a second consciousness inside their head that works like a subconscious, did they? Step aside, kid, I got this. With his mental image disappearing from Izuku's sight, Kayase used the symbiote suit and detached from Izuku's torso and arms to Izuku's computer and phone with only a small tendril, attaching himself to Izuku's body. They now began to load up video after video, all playing at double speed, creating an ungodly amount of noise which led to Izuku quickly plugging in a set of headphones so the symbiote didn't accidentally destroy his ears from the sudden sensory overload. Oh yeah, forget about your senses. My bad, Kayase half-heartedly apologized, not even looking away from the computer screen. You could at least sound like you mean it. How long should this take exactly? Izuku asked, getting a quick reply back. About 30 minutes or so. Might as well get comfortable, Kayase explained while Izuku just laid down on his bed. Momo was completely unsure if she was actually injected with anything that worked, however that uncertainty vanished the instant she entered her building. An almost crippling wave of nausea and weakness consumed her as she clung to the wall for support. Come on, just a few more minutes, skeptical if she could even make it to her room, Momo practically dragged herself through her apartment. Even with her feet feeling like cinder blocks, Momo reached her bedroom doorway but felt a burst of energy as she ran for the bathroom, loosely holding her own hair back before the contents of her stomach leapt out of her mouth. After several gut-churning minutes hovering above the toilet, Momo pulled herself onto her feet and spent very little time with mouthwash before making her way to her bed. Stripping off items of clothing one by one till she was left in only her underwear, she collapsed onto her bed. Here's hoping it all goes fine, Momo softly spoke out to herself before she lost consciousness and finally gave into her slumber. And done. Izuku, like an excited child, leapt up from his bed. He felt Kayase's form connect back onto his body and form his spider suit once more, deciding to leap out of his open window the moment his mask covered his face. Wait, I don't feel any different, Izuku asked out loud as he web-zipped onto a nearby rooftop. Just pretend like you're about to fight. Everything will come with instinct. Izuku willingly nodded for a moment, but, as his body flinched, he then instinctively descended down into a crouched fighting position with his right hand on the ground and his left hand behind him. Pretending someone would be trying to charge at him, Izuku did a full flip to the left with his right leg moving in a way it would hit an opponent as he flipped. The second he landed, his body managed to go back into the same crouched position as before, but his hands were aiming right in front of him. "Oh wow, you weren't kidding that it would come with instinct," Izuku laughed as he stood up looking at his wrists before running off the roof and began to web zip and swing towards the city in cover of darkness. "It's time to make a difference and use my powers for the good of others," Izuku thought to himself when Kayase spoke up. "You're gonna need a name out there, aren't you?" As he kept thinking of names relating to All Might or anything like a spider pun, Izuku couldn't help but realize that a simple name was right in front of him. He flipped over a high building and stuck on the side of a radio antenna as he watched over the city. "I'll be Spider-Man." The end. Thanks for watching my video and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.